Chaque zone de l'UM6P est équipée d'un plan d'évacuation qui indique les sorties de secours et les gestes à tenir en cas d'urgence. Prenez votre temps de l'observer ou demandez de l'accompagnement par le staff organisateur de l'événement. En cas d'écoute d'alarme, prendre du temps, ne pas se précipiter, suivre les équipiers d'évacuation ou le chemin le plus proche vers une sortie de secours indiquée par cette signalétique. Ne pas utiliser l'ascenseur. Une fois dehors, se déplacer vers le point de rassemblement pour confirmer votre sécurité aux responsables d'évacuation et ne pas quitter le point de rassemblement qu'après autorisation. Si vous êtes le premier à notifier une situation d'urgence au sein des lieux de l'événement, vous devez activer le système d'alarme en poussant sur les déclencheurs manuels. Nos équipes sont à votre disposition et vous souhaitent un excellent événement.
So hi, welcome to everybody. So this is the second part of game theory. So this morning we had a very, very nice session by three leading game theorists, Peyton Young, Sylvain Sora, and Carl Sigmund. So Carl Sigmund will continue with us this afternoon. Carl Sigmund is a great, great mathematician. He got many, many prizes. He's from Vienna. He's also a philosopher, and he has many, many distinguished prizes. So Carl is a multidisciplinary researcher. He's interested not only by mathematics, ergodic theory, dynamical systems. He's also interested in biology, application of game theory to social science, of evolution of cooperation, of study of animals, species. So many, many contributions, 7 books. One of them, Games of Life, has been sold perhaps 100,000 copies. So he's a popular writer. I have one of his books that's just been published, The Walls of Reason, The Entanglement of Mathematics and Philosophy. So just to give you an idea about who is Carl. So he was head of the Math Institute in Vienna, president of the Austrian Mathematical Society, member of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, plenary lecturer in the International Congress of Mathematics. He got the Blaise Pascal Medal, the Isaacs Award for his achievement. He published more than 20 papers in Nature. Nature is the best scientific journal existing. And he wrote 7 books, so this one is the last of his books. So I'm very proud that Carl is with us today, and I give you the
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rida. Merci beaucoup. Thank you for this kind publicity for my book and for the kind invitation. And I'm going to speak about game theory and the new science of reputation. First of all, game theory. When I say game theory, people say, oh, what a wonderful subject. You are studying chess and you are studying poker and you are playing all your life. It's not really that way. Game theory is the mathematics of conflicts of interest. Such conflicts of interest occur everywhere where there are conflicts of a moral nature or military nature or economic nature or whatever. But it uses the vocabulary of parlor games, such as card games, poker, chess, and all this. It uses terms like player, or like strategy, or like payoff, but it addresses in general not problems of bridge or so, but problems of a more fundamental nature, I believe. And I want to speak about one problem, which is the problem of human cooperation and the evolution of human cooperation. I mean, already Aristotle has understood that humans cooperate a lot with each other, remarkably much. They also fight, but even in their fights, they often cooperate. So man, Aristotle said, is a social animal, a zoon politikon. Aristotle said that there were other animals which look very different from us, but which are also social animals. For instance, bees are social animals, or ants or termites, the state-building insects. But now we have understood that with us, the reason for cooperation is very different from that which makes bees cooperate with each other. Because bees are inbred, highly inbred. They are almost clones of each other. They share a lot of their genes. And in that case, cooperation is not much more surprising than the cooperation of various cells in an organism. They belong to the same organism, and one speaks of superorganisms in the case of beehives or of anthills. With humans, it must be different. So I'm going to use game theory as a method, and game theory is now 100 years old, and some basic progress was due to Oskar Morgenstern, an Austrian economist, and John von Neumann, a Hungarian mathematics prodigy. They worked together on a book that was really shaping the field. And shortly later, John Nash introduced some essential concepts, and this John Nash may be known to some of you for the film A Beautiful Mind. Since that time, game theory has evolved very much, and it has been applied in many fields. And starting with John Nash, there have been Nobel Prizes in economics, I think at least a dozen of them in the last half of the century. So game theory studies individual decisions in a social context where the success of an action depends on what others are doing. In the beginning, it was assumed that the actors, the players, are rational and can think ahead many moves and understand that the other one also thinks ahead, etc. But later, game theory was also applied to games played in other organisms. For instance, games played by animals, plants, or even bacteria. It can be applied to any living community. And one doesn't need to assume rationality. These animals or plants have behavioral programs, and the success of that program depends on what the others are doing. And if they are successful, they will spread. They could also spread simply by learning, by copying whatever is more successful. And this led to behavioral game theory and to a lot of tests of how humans interact, to many economic experiments. And I understand that there is also a game laboratory now being built at UM6P. So let me start with one extremely simple game. This is called the donation game. There are two players, player 1 and player 2, and they are anonymous. They don't meet. They know that they will never meet. They will never know each other. They are in different rooms. They could be in different countries. And they have to decide independently between two options, C and D. Yes, you have to push a button. And if you push C, you know that you have to pay €5 to the experimenter, and the experimenter will give $15, yes, and the experimenter will give $15 to the co-player. And if you push D, you don't do that. So effectively, C means to donate, to make a gift of $15 to the co-player at your own cost, 5. So what happens in that case? What is the payoff after you have interacted? Look at this line. My payoff depends on what I am doing, if I make a donation or not, and if the co-player makes a donation or not. If I and the co-player make both a donation, if we both push C, then we get both $10 each, yes? Because we pay 5, but we receive 15. Yes? This makes $10. If I make a donation, but the other player makes not, then I have simply lost $5 and I got nothing in return. And vice versa, if I make no donation and the other one does, then I get $15 and have to pay nothing. But if the co-player also makes no donation, then we both end up with $0. So this simple game has a very simple structure which can be encapsulated by this matrix. You see, if we both play C, one player chooses C and D, the row, and the other player chooses C and D, the column. If we both play C, we get 10. If I play D and the other one C, I get 15, and so on. So no matter what the co-player does, it turns out that I should play D, because C, if the co-player chooses the column C, I have to choose between a payoff of $10 or 15. 15 is better, so I play D. And if the co-player plays D, I have to choose between a payoff of -5 and 0, so I play D. So whatever the other one is doing, my best strategy is to play D. But the other player is in exactly the same situation, and he will also pay D. And so we both end up with 0, and we go home. And we feel that something was wrong. We did something wrong. We could have gained $10 by collaborating both. This is what C means. And we haven't done that. For selfish reasons, we have made an economically bad decision. We have lost money by trying to maximize our payoff. This is a game that is much studied under the name of Prisoner's Dilemma game. You may have heard of this. There are two prisoners accused of a joint crime and so on. But I want to stay in the game lab, and I don't want to go to the prison, because in the prison this is difficult to repeat under controlled conditions. But in the game laboratory, one can do that. So what happens really when we do the experiment? We have seen that players, if they optimize, will end up with getting 0, with playing D. But in fact, in 50%, roughly 50% of the cases, the players play C. And this means if I play C with 50% and the other one with 50%, then this means that the outcome $10 has a probability of 25%. Yes? Each of these outcomes is roughly equally likely. And this is interesting to study. Why does it happen this way? If you ask the players, why did you play C? They said, I play C because I hoped for an outcome where we both played C. Yes? These are players who are called conditional cooperators. I want to cooperate provided the other player cooperates too. But of course, I do not know if the other player is going to play C or not. I do not know ahead of the time whether the other player is a conditional cooperator or not. I have to trust. So what actually happens is, it seems almost as if these conditional cooperators assign a payoff, 10 plus something, some x, which is larger than $5. Yes, this is a payoff that is not a monetary payoff. So monetary payoff is $10 and that's it, yes? But they feel a satisfaction, they have a preference that makes them choose C if the other one plays C. And this is a great question. Where does this trend for playing C, for conditional cooperators, come from? There is, among psychologists, there is a tradition that they say, many say, you shouldn't believe what the player tells about his own motivation. Often humans don't know their own motivations. They are not honest about it. They may deceive themselves. So in order to test whether these players were really conditional cooperators or not, the Japanese psychologist Yamagishi hit upon a very interesting variation of this donation game. It's a very simple variation. It is sequential play. The two players do not decide at the same time, but one after the other. First, the column player chooses column C or column D. And then the row player is informed of this, knows what he's doing, and can choose his strategy or her strategy. And you will not be surprised that if the column player plays D, then the other player with almost 100% probability is also going to play D. One doesn't want to be exploited, one doesn't want to be cheated. But it turns out that if the co-player plays C, then with 75 to 80% probability, the other player, the one who chooses the row, plays C. He does not play D. D would give him the higher payoff, yes? 15. Doesn't want it. He plays C. He really is a conditional cooperator. This is really his favorite outcome. And the most interesting thing is that the first player, the one who chooses the column, seems to know this, seems to anticipate this, because this first player also chooses C with a higher probability, also something between 70 and 80%. It is almost as if this first mover knows that the other one will be under an obligation, will feel an obligation to also cooperate, to also play C. This is a very, very striking variation of this donation game, I believe. So both players choose C with a probability which is now higher, not 50%, but 75% or more. And so the outcome is that this outcome of mutual cooperation is now not 25%, but 50% roughly, yes? So it's twice as likely as with simultaneous play. And this shows that in this idea of conditional cooperation, there is certainly something behind it. This strategy of the second player is a kind of tit-for-tat strategy. If you play D, I will play D. If you play C, I will play C. Yes, I will repeat what you have done to me. It's a very elementary strategy. And this can be tested by repeating the donation game. We can go back to the simultaneous donation game, repeating it for several rounds. Remember that so far we have assumed just one round, one interaction, and then the two players go away. They know that they will never meet each other again, yes? But now suppose that they have several rounds of the same game. And in that case, there are very many strategies. You could play C every second time, or you could play C after 2 Ds of the other, or whatever, yes? But we restrict ourselves to 2 possibilities only. So players are told that before this experiment, before the 6 rounds of the donation game, they have to decide whether they will play tit for tat, start with a C and then do whatever the other player did in the previous round, Or they play always D. For round after round, the defect, they play D. Yes? And what is the outcome in this case? Suppose that I play tit for tat, and the other player also plays tit for tat. This means that we cooperate in every round. 6 rounds, and in each round we earn $10, so altogether $60. Suppose that the tit for tat player meets an always defect player. Then the tit for tat player in the first round will be exploited. He loses $5 and gets nothing in return, yes? But from then on, he does not collaborate any longer, and that's it. So altogether, the payoff is -5. And by contrast, the always defect player against the tit for tat player earns $15 in the first round, but then gets nothing anymore, so it's 15. And if 2 players, all D players meet, then of course they get nothing round after round. So you see, in this case, the situation is different. If the column player plays tit for tat, I should play tit for tat. 60 is better than 15. If the column player plays always defect, I should play always defect, because 0, it's not much, but it's better than -5, yes? So I should do whatever the other player is doing. In contrast, in the 1-round donation game, there was one strategy which was always best, no matter what the other one did, namely play D. In this case, it is different. Oops, yes, in this case it is different. You have to do whatever the other player is doing. And as I have mentioned, this can be played, this can be played also in large populations where, say, 100 people or so, and they meet randomly, and then they play 6 rounds of the prisoner's dilemma game. And it depends now if the majority at the beginning is playing tit for tat, then tit for tat is more successful than always defect, and tit for tat, by being successful, will be imitated more and more often by more and more players, and tit for tat will win. And in the end, in the population, everyone will play tit for tat. But if there is not enough tit for tat players at the beginning, if it is very likely that you meet an always defect player, then it is better to also play always defect. Always defect is more successful and will spread in the population and in the end become a social norm. So it depends on the initial condition of the population, whatever is winning out. And now let us return to this 1-round donation game. Remember, we started with this. What if the game is not repeated? What if it is unlikely that you ever meet the same player twice? We can also model this in an experiment. Suppose there are 100 test persons, and from time to time the experimenter chooses 2 of them, and they play exactly 1 round of the prisoner's dilemma, and then they are separated again. And each player plays several rounds, but never against the same co-player, always against others. There is no possibility now to play tit for tat. There is no possibility to retaliate if the other one has played D. But nevertheless, as we have seen, a substantial amount of players cooperate, play D. Yes, there is a considerable amount of cooperation. And it turns out that this cooperation is increased, is vastly increased, if the players are informed of what their co-player did in previous rounds. The players have not met the co-player so far. Yes, this is their first interaction. But suppose that the players learn about what the co-player did in his previous rounds. And that it turns out, under this condition, that the amount of cooperation is very much increased. This is an interesting phenomenon which is called indirect reciprocity. This is a tendency to play C if you know that your co-player, whom you are encountering for the first time, you are interacting for the first time with this co-player, but if you know that he has played C, you have a tendency to also play C. If he has not played C, you will not play C. Yes, so you are doing something like tit for tat, but it is not exactly tit for tat because you are not meeting the same person twice. Yes, you're always meeting new persons, but you know what these persons have been doing in this experimental setup. So to distinguish between direct and indirect reciprocity, to the left hand, direct. Yes, one player helps the other one returns the help, and so it goes on. This is repeated donation game, and this is very well understood. In the other one, it's more complex. In one round, player A helps B by playing C. And in the next round, player C, the yellow player, learns about this and has to decide whether to make a donation to A or not. And in that case, this is no direct circle of feedback, but it is an indirect circle, but it leads to more cooperation. So this has been explained in the following way. Direct reciprocity means I'll scratch your back if you scratch my back. But indirect reciprocity means I'll scratch your back if you scratch somebody's back. This is much more complicated to understand. This is indirect reciprocity. And it is a very prevailing phenomenon in human societies, but it is difficult to understand the mechanisms. Yes? This is just generalized tit for tat. Play C, if your co-player played C in a previous round, otherwise play D. There are problems with these strategies, I should say. And the following problem, if I know that the co-player has not collaborated in previous rounds, then I will play D according to this tit for tat strategy, this generalized tit for tat. But if I play D, the other players in the population will learn about it. Now I'm branded with being a D player, yes? And they will be less likely to make me a donation in the next round. So I'm punishing a player, but at a cost to myself. I will be punished in the next round. And the guy whoever punished me will be punished in turn in the next round, and so on. This is a very unsatisfactory state of affairs. It can be overcome if players know the difference between a justified and an unjustified defection. Justified is if this other player has met with a bad guy and has played D. Unjustified is if this other player is just wantonly out of greed or so not making a donation to the other player. But if you want to follow the difference between justified and unjustified, you must not always only look back at the previous round, but also the round before that and before that and before that, because you have to follow in this chain of giving to check whether this action was justified or was not justified. This takes for an enormous amount of information, and it seems if you make the combinatorics of it or so, it's not very likely to be really used very much. The other approach is simpler maybe. This is that if I meet a D player, according to generalized tit for tat, I should play D. But from time to time, I forgive him and play C. And in that case, if I played C, the next player will play C on me. So for a certain amount of forgiveness can emerge, not by moral thinking, not by ethical reasoning. It emerges simply by evolution, by people copying whatever strategy is best and seeing that a certain amount of forgiveness is pretty good. So this evolution of forgiveness is also a fascinating aspect of this game. And so the basic thing for indirect reciprocity is that you have to have information about the other player. You must know something of him. You can either have observed what the other player has been doing, or you are told about what the other player is doing. But you must, in any case, know the previous actions of that player, and you must know the reputation of that player. And in human societies, of course, one need not watch everything. One can also rely on hearsay, on gossip. Humans talk a lot with each other. And what I like to talk most is about other persons behind their back. Yes, this is a very prevailing human trait. And so by gossip, you learn a lot about the reputation of a person even before you interact for the first time with that reputation. And this role of gossip has been emphasized in a book that I highly recommend about the surprising science of reputation. This reputation plays an economic role, not only for this indirect reciprocity, not only for this donation game, but also in other contexts, for the ultimatum game, for punishing others and so on. It is always very important to take the reputation of the other players into consideration. And economists are more and more interested in that aspect. And there is actually a new branch of economics which calls itself the reputation management, and which deals with this. You know, for instance, a hotel lives by its reputation. People, before booking, look at what the clients have been saying. And so reputation, the doctors advertise that they have been very successful. So this reputation is a very important factor for economic success. This is so in costly punishment, for instance, or an ultimatum game, reputation effects play a big role. I skip this slide on the ultimatum game, and I come to a real-life example of the role of reputation. The gentleman you see here is Pierre Omidyar, who was born in Paris, but I think has Iranian roots. And he became a programmer, moved to California, and he founded eBay, became infinitely rich, well, tens of billions of dollars, yes, extremely successful. And the story behind eBay is interesting because at around the year 2000, this Omidyar tried to establish an internet platform for trading so that someone from Hong Kong could trade with someone from Switzerland and so on. These were players who did not know each other in general. Anonymous players, yes, who traded on the internet, and often this was just a one-shot interaction. And it turned out that this internet platform, which Omidyar called the auction web, did not succeed. People didn't take to it, they were distrustful, they were not using it. It was a flop. And then he introduced, it was like in an experiment, it was real life, he introduced a single variation of this auction web. He turned it to eBay by asking the players after each interaction to rate each other. And this rating was on the page, was open for everyone else to look at these ratings and to judge whether their co-player had a good reputation or not. This cannot be read, but here only eBay, it says, like your favorite grad school teacher, encourages, recognizes, and rewards good behavior. As your feedback grows, eBay posts stars next to your rating, each color signifying a feedback milestone. So this is really like in elementary school, yes? The children want to get stars, colorful stars, yellow, turquoise, purple, and so on. And after some time, people are mostly concerned about their reputation, about getting stars, and not about the commercial interaction itself, yes? It is very simple, thumb ups and thumb down. So the motto is, use our feedback forum, give praise when it is due, make complaints when appropriate. So this is really a very simple rule, yes? But it is a golden rule. At least for Pierre Omidyar, it was definitely a golden rule. Charles Darwin knew about this importance of reputation. He, like Aristotle, he knew that humans are social animals But they are not the only social animals. There are other social animals, and in particular social insects, who interact and cooperate a lot with each other. And Charles Darwin understood that this helping each other is essential for human life. He wrote, the small strength and speed of man, his want of natural weapons, etc., are more than counterbalanced by his social qualities, which led him to give and receive aid from his fellow men. Yes? But the question is, where does this mechanism behind it come from? Give and receive aids within a beehive. This giving and receiving aid is driven by a genetic program, a blind impulse. With humans, it must be different because we are not so closely related. We collaborate, of course, with our brothers and sisters and so on, but we also collaborate frequently enough with total strangers. Where is this? Why is this so? Well, Darwin said man's motive to give aid, in contrast to the motives of bees and ants, man's motive no longer consists of a blind instinctive impulse, but it's largely influenced by the praise and blame of his fellow men. So Darwin knew this already. And now I want to say that this anxiousness about being praised, about avoiding to be blamed, this is a very deep instinct with us. It relies on cues that often the people are not even aware of. They don't even notice. And I want to end up with two examples of such experiments. One experiment is quite famous, sorry. This is a real experiment. In a department in England, well, there was a habit of having a tea break. And everyone went into a room and had his tea and had his coffee, cookies, and so on. And then, in some corner of this room, there was a box where they paid some pennies or whatever, yes, for the cookies. And nobody checked how much they paid. This box was called the honesty box. Yes, this was a long tradition in this department. And on the wall of this room, not noticed by the people, was a calendar. And this calendar changed, of course, from week to week. And on some weeks, this calendar showed pictures of flowers, bright, pretty flowers. And in other weeks, it shows pictures of eyes, usually female eyes, smiling and so. And the outcome was that in the eyes week, the contributions to the honesty box were 3 times higher than in the flower weeks. Yes? You see here from bottom to top the picture on the calendar that the people didn't notice really. They didn't follow this. They didn't know that this was an experiment going on. Yes? Sometimes there were eyes, and next week there was flowers, and eyes and flowers. And here on the right side of the slide, there is the amount of money that was paid week for week. And you see that in the eyes week, the amount was, in general, 3 times as high as in the flowers week. So I find that this is a very striking phenomenon. Yes, we are always anxious about being watched. Even if we are alone, we are not completely sure whether somebody might be watching us. Yes, and in the ancestral environment, in a village, who knows who is sitting behind the next tree and seeing what I'm doing and then gossiping to the others or so. This must be a very deep-rooted instinct. And how deep-rooted is shown by another experiment where, again, this is in a game theoretic laboratory now. The players are in front of their computer screen. They are playing the donation game, one-shot donation game. And on the screen, there is an icon. There is an icon, namely a circle, and in the circle there are 3 dots. I will show you this. A circle and 3 dots. It could be either the circle on the right-hand side or the circle on the left-hand side. And if the people saw on the computer screen the circle on the right-hand side, they collaborated just as much as usual. Yes, they pushed C as often as they always do, icon or no icon. But if there was the left-hand side icon, then they recognized a face. They saw two eyes and a mouth. And this very simple sketch was enough to trigger a considerably larger propensity, a tendency to play cooperation. So this feeling of being watched is, I think, absolutely essential, this concern with reputation. And it plays also a big role, of course, for human morals. The writer Mencken has said that conscience is a nagging feeling that someone may be watching. And I think this feeling is always with us. Okay, thank you very much.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
Carl, amazing talk. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I would like to welcome some anthropologist colleagues from the university. They were with us this morning, and I would be very grateful for their help. In fact, there is a lot of, as Carl was explaining, there is a lot of connection between evolutionary game theory and evolutionary anthropology. And our colleague from the university, here we have two of them. Sarah Allali, who did her PhD at California University. She's Moroccan. We can be proud of her. She was in Santa Barbara, which is the best, one of the two best universities in anthropology. She has publications as well as Edmund Seabright, who was from Oxford, and New Mexico, which is the second best university in anthropology. So both of them have publications in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, Lancet, Science, so the best journals existing, and they are members of this university. They are assistant professor at the School of Collective Intelligence, and I'm very happy that they will first interact with our speaker, and then it will be you, audience, who will have the lead. I'm going to start with Sarah.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk. I mean, of course, as anthropologists, we're very aware of the importance of reputation.
I know.
There's a lot of questions and a lot of interesting research that can be done along that line. Namely, so when we think about, for example, even things that, talking to the general audience here, that we live with, but we don't question very often, such as the existence of this very sort of worldwide religion. So even when we're not watched, right, we have these beliefs that somebody might be watching us. At least some of us have those beliefs. So I was wondering, so what are your thoughts about that? Do you think, so in the context of a small-scale society where there are people watching you, might always be watched, but as the societies become bigger and as things can be done more anonymously, do you think that's why institutions like world religions have sort of evolved to provide a sort of alternative to sort of maintain this cooperation in a larger context with more individuals? Yeah.
Yes, well, I certainly do. And I should say, maybe I have too many mics. I should certainly say that this concern with reputation is not a new discovery for nobody, not for psychologists, not for anthropologists. Everyone knew about it, except maybe the economists. They were the last to discover the importance of this capital, that is reputation. I may be unfair.
I disagree.
I knew that, but in any case, the importance of religion in this context is certainly enormous. But I think that a little children even before they know about God or gods or whatever, know that the parents are watching them all the time, yes, and the parents tell them that whatever they do, they will eventually hear about it and they will be punished or whatever. So this is a concern that is, of course, re-inborn, and may have, there is an interesting branch of evolutionary psychology and certainly also anthropology, which deals with evolution of religion through these psychological mechanisms. Yes.
My dad used to tell me that he had video cameras in my room to see if I was doing my homework. So,
Yes.
And as we now that we have sort of new ways of interacting through, for example, social media, etc., in a way, I feel like this big society, we interact with these people we don't know, but in a way, it looks like sometimes the small-scale societies where reputation is also very important, and so people who get critics on social media, and so it can feel very strongly, even if it's coming from strangers on the other side of the world, as it would in a very small-scale society. So this was just another observation.
Yes. Well, yes. Nowadays, you do not only feel that you are being watched, you are being watched. And there are places where you are practically unable to avoid camera or so, and there are countries like in China or so where there is a rating going on for the citizen and so on. So this is an enormous shift in a phase transition, yes, in our human society, and well, who knows what will come out of that? But it is important, yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting that, for example, in online spaces, anonymity, even though anonymity is often very valuable. But it can lead to a breakdown of cooperation. It can lead to people being, much more willing to engage in online abuse or, unconstructive interactions. The way that people communicate with each other online is often a lot more toxic and abusive than
Yes.
the way that people would interact with each other in real life. And I think that may be for two reasons. It may be firstly because reputation is less important. Certainly if you're anonymous, there are no reputational effects. But also because I think that there's a cognitive aspect to this, right? It's not just that we're rationally thinking about our reputation, it's that we're viscerally reacting to something, as you showed with the pictures of the circles and the two eyes. It's not a rational reaction to say this image looks like a face and therefore my reputation. No, it's an instinctive, cognitive, visceral reaction to say when I see a face, it's triggering something in me that makes me more pro-social. And so it's not just anonymity itself, it's the black screen, it's the separation between the people that may lead to this dehumanization or this lack of instinct, this lack of cooperativeness in these contexts.
You're right. This is a strange dual phenomenon. In fact, in the one case, you are watched and observed all the time, and on the other hand, it is so difficult to touch the other person, to get to real grips. When I phone to an airline company or so, I'm never quite sure whether I'm speaking with a chatbot or whomever, and this makes one angry and furious. And under these conditions of anonymity, nastiness evolves very, very quickly, as you have said. So I do not understand why people can send in anonymous comments to this and that. It brings out the worst in us, yes. And this should be, in my opinion, a very simple decision that everyone is responsible for his or her words and should tell this, yes. I don't know why this is not implemented.
No, I think that's right. I think that it's a very good practice to have when you're interacting with someone online is to imagine that they are in fact there in front
Yes.
of you. Because, you know, it can be very satisfying to you know, leave a comment and get likes at the expense of someone in a way that you would never do if they were in front of you. You wouldn't make some fun of someone to their face, even if people were laughing. So trying to imagine yourself confronted with a person, I think, is a very good practice that people should try and engage in. I have a slightly different question, a change of topic, if you don't mind. One thing that's interesting about the role of reputation is that there are different ways that reputation can be important. If punishment is common, you want to maintain, or you want to avoid a bad reputation at all costs because you don't want to get punished. In which case, you may not want to risk interacting with people lest you gain a bad reputation. If, on the other hand, reputation is more of a positive thing, that is to say, if you have a positive reputation, people will interact with you more, then the incentive structure is slightly different. It's less that you obviously still want to avoid a bad reputation because you don't want to be excluded from potential cooperative engagements, but also if you opt out of any interactions whatsoever, that's just as bad as if you had a bad reputation, and so you still do want to engage. I wonder, because it seems to me quite clear that in the first case, in the case where you want to avoid punishment at all costs, this could lead, even though it's still a reputational effect, this could lead to a worse kind of collective outcome where people try to avoid these negative outcomes and therefore don't engage in cooperative tasks with each other, relative to the more positive case where people are incentivized to try and behave well with each other so that they gain, you know, good reputations which allow them to pursue cooperation more. Is this, and so it's a different kind of reputation in each case. Is this something that you've thought about, and do you think that there are parallels, real-world parallels that come to mind?
Well, you are sketching a whole research program. I sure have thought about it briefly, but never really engaged in it. But it is a very, very interesting question. We all seem to have a modulus in our head to make a calculus about how we are, what we can still afford. Someone who has a wonderful reputation for many years can maybe afford to say a few crude words to someone else who truly deserves it, but someone who has not a good reputation and he says the same words is maybe considered as barbarous and nasty and so on. Yes, this instinctive calculus, there I use the word instinct again, I shouldn't, but it is, we are computing all the time, subconsciously, our standing in the eyes of this one or that one and how they interact. And to test this in the laboratory and more importantly in the field is a huge research topic.
Yes, it ties up very closely with something that anthropologists are very interested in, which is the concept of social status. Not only anthropologists, but social scientists in general, which is slightly different, I think, than reputation. It's closely tied to reputation, but reputation, I think, is often about a specific thing. This person has a reputation for being collaborative or for being generous, whereas social status seems to be a kind of a more general ability to command influence within a group, and I think it's one of the really interesting and rich areas in social science right now is to think about how reputation and social status interact and build on each other.
Some researchers use the term Machiavellian brain as you said, reputation, which may be basically a character term, and then the social status, which is politics, and they intermingle in most wonderful ways, yes.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to now ask the public. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Sarah. And, I can see that you can stay hours discussion and it will not be over. So let me just give a small correction. In economics, there is a theory of reputation. A lot of people they do an industrial organization and are interested by reputation. One of the very famous results in repeated games is that, well, if you imagine that you can convince the other that you are strong or you are a leader, you can make sure that, for example, in repeated game, there is a result called the Folk theorem telling you that there are lots of equilibria when you repeat the game. One of them is the tit for tat type of equilibria. I cooperate if you cooperate, otherwise I will punish you. And if you convince the other guy that you are strong and you will commit really to some strategy which is the best for you, and because the other one will best reply to your strategy, then you can shrink all the equilibriums, only one equilibrium, which is the one you prefer. So if you succeed to establish a good reputation, it may be very good for you, and that's how you can refine equilibria. One way of refining equilibria in repeated games is using reputation as reputation management, if you want to call it, but in a strategic way. Okay, so now...
You're right, Rida.
So let me now ask the public to so please...
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Well, I have a question about that situation of scratch somebody else's back and I scratch yours, right? So A, B, C, you see that A is being good to B, who has been good to B, therefore me, C, is going to be good to A, right? Has this been tried in different kind of societies? For instance, if you take Japan, which is very homogeneous, and everybody has the same skin color, the same creed, etc., that's one case. And very heterogeneous societies like America, South Africa, right? Wouldn't you expect the result to be completely different? Because in Japan, C would like bees of ants, something like that, would feel a complete empathy with B and then would react this way. But in heterogeneous society like South Africa, I guess the situation will be different. Has it been tried, or is it too politically incorrect to try it? Thank you.
Yes, I don't have the references here, but such situations have been studied. I have incidentally greatly oversimplified. This type of indirect reciprocity is called also upstream reciprocity. I see people, I help someone because this someone has been helped. There is the other reciprocity, which is somebody helped me, I feel obliged to help the next person. I cannot return my debt, so to speak, but I help the next person. This is another type of indirect reciprocity. And the interaction of these two types of reciprocity is what has been found quite different in homogeneous than in inhomogeneous populations. Yes.
Thank you.
So hello everyone. I have a question about the repeated donation game. For example, if we take the assumption that you have to decide for the 6 rounds and you have to remove every choice, what are the strategies that we can use? Because like the tit for tat and all this doesn't work anymore. So I'm a little bit intrigued by the strategies that we can use in this case.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You are touching a very important point. In this situation, the players, which I described, the players had to commit to tit for tat right in the beginning. But what if they could, in every round, make the decision? Then very often, when they know that this is the last round, and the other player cannot retaliate, well, I play D on him and I will exploit him because he cannot hit back. Yes, this is a so-called last round effect. If the players were completely rational, they would then go to the second last round effect, and since the last round is already decided, you play D, so in second last round you should also play D. And with that reasoning, you should play D all the time. You should never cooperate. But in fact, in experiments, it has been shown that people usually cooperate round after round when they can decide between each round. But at the end, 1 or 2 rounds before the end, there is a strong tendency for playing D. This is what you meant, I think. No? Then you must take the mic again. Sorry, maybe that afterwards I can, you can explain.
No, I meant like if players doesn't have the right to choose between rounds, like at the very beginning, we ask them to make the 6 choices. For example, C, 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 and D, D at the beginning, and you don't have, you have to lock them.
Well, in that case, it is like the one-shot prisoner's dilemma. Yes, this is to be expected. So it is like the one-shot prisoner's dilemma with the same outcomes. Simply the payoffs are changed. Yes. So the interesting thing is that if they can revise, if they can play conditional strategies and in each round decide what to do as a consequence of what the history of the interaction.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome.
All right. Thank you for the talk. Hi. And you know, it really makes you think about seeing 3 big faces as the face of Science Week. My question is, maybe it touches a little bit upon reputation, but not quite. It's about power. Have you seen how, I mean, do you have any idea in your reflections or any previous results about how these experiments play out in hierarchical structures? Right.
I must confess that I don't know, and maybe I can turn to you and ask you. I am a mathematician. All my life I have worked on these toy models, so simplified, yes? And power structures, societies with power structures are so incredibly complicated that I never dare to touch them. But anthropologists dare to touch them. And maybe you know how to answer this question.
Could you, I'm not sure if you still have access to a mic. Your question was, what is the connection between these kinds of reputational effects and power hierarchies or large-scale societal hierarchies? Is that? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you right now. So we know that, for example, when it's a prisoner's dilemma with all the conditions that we put, we know that the best strategy is, you know, I think maybe other people have heard this, but tit for tat, you know,
Sure.
Be nice, retaliate, don't be a pushover. But when there's hierarchical structures and power involved, if you're playing this game with your boss and, you know, maybe their reputation won't change their position of power, how do you have any reflections or any intuitions about what the best strategy would be? That's it.
Okay, well, so the thing is, if you're changing the payouts, then you're fundamentally playing a different game, right? The point of the prisoner's dilemma, as you know, as a game theoretical thought experiment, is that the 2 players are on equal footing, right? If the players aren't on equal footing, if they're not getting the same, you know, the same rewards for both cooperating or the same punishments for both defecting, then you're playing a fundamentally different game. And yeah, certainly, you know, hierarchies, power imbalances change this a great deal. You can't, if one person is in a position of power over another, then it can be really if you were to map that out in the kind of game theoretical way where you look at the payouts, if your boss is always winning and you're always losing, then there's not much strategy to go for. And one of the interesting things about human societies is that we're able to avoid these traps in a way that a lot of other species don't. So a lot of other species have what we call linear dominance hierarchies, where pecking orders is another word for it, where whichever animal is most physically dominant, they get first access to the resources. And then in a linear fashion, the second most physically dominant gets the second access, et cetera, going down. Humans largely avoid this trap, and we do so because of our ability to cooperate and our ability to communicate. And this is something that I think we've been talking about quite a bit. Essentially, to answer your question, what's the best strategy? The best strategy is you don't play that game. If you're in a situation where one person has more power over you, you can't play that game. You need to bring in allies. You need to bring in a different kind of game.
Just to illustrate that with real world examples, I mean, that's what unions are. When workers get together and they're like, well, we need a raise in our salary, or we need to have our boss changed. That's an example of that. And you do that through coalitions, and as Ed said, this power in humans is quite different. It's acquired not through dominance, but through maybe prestige, or we value expertise and those kind of things. And it's easy to build a coalition it's relative to other animals. It's easy to build coalitions to get rid of a bad boss.
I just wanted to find out, in social games, have you done any research with respect to...
Yes.
I wanted to find out if you have done any research with respect to the effectiveness of the punishment, because in an African context, sometimes it's not that we know that there is a punishment, it's how effective. For example, I might not be a corrupt person, but if everybody is corrupt and get over me, then my reputation is zero and I'll be behind. So I have to join the game, the bandwagon and everything. I want to find out if you have analyzed effectiveness of punishment with respect to compliance for reputation or non-compliance.
Yes, there are a lot of these researches going on with surprising results. One assumes, of course, that if the punishment is really severe, then it will work better. But this is not always the case. And there are some experiments which show that a purely symbolical punishment, like putting a black mark against some name or so, nothing else, can also work in inciting cooperation. This is a very a field where there are many results, and I'm not sure whether these results all point in the same direction. I'm not sure whether one can encapsulate them in a simple formula. It is a very complicated situation.
I just want to circle back to the first concept of cooperation and the experiment of donation. Are there any limitations to applying this, I would say, a mathematical concept to different groups of people that are impacted by different cultures? And if there are any limitations, how do you approach it in this research? For instance, I was just imagining if in the donation experiment, if the first participant comes from an individualistic culture, and the other participant, for example, comes more from a collectivist culture, how is that will affect their decision making? And
You're making it easy for me. This is an anthropological question again, I think. Yes. I apologize, the light is blinding me, so. But I really believe that this is your baby, right?
Lots of people have been interested in this. I can recommend some books. There's a whole section of Joe Henrich's The Weirdest People in the World, which focuses on this question directly. I think there are two general answers that we can say. One is that actually, surprisingly, the human tendency towards cooperativeness does seem to be pretty universal. There is variation, but there are no human cultures, no matter how individualistic, where there is no no tendency to cooperate at all. It just doesn't happen. It seems to be something really crucial about the human species. And in fact, interestingly, one thing that seems to be the case that distinguishes, more individualistic societies that place more emphasis on individual freedom over societies that place more importance on culture, on family and collective responsibility, is that actually people in societies with more emphasis on individual liberties tend to be more likely to cooperate with strangers, for example, people that they don't know. And so it's not necessarily that they're less cooperative, it's that the cooperation is directed elsewhere in often quite traditional conservative societies. There's a huge amount of emphasis on being there for your family, being there for your in-group, being there for your, your community. But that seems to maybe come at the expense of caring about people outside of that social group. It's almost like there's only so much, cooperation that we have to give, and you sort of decide, do you place it all within your family and your in-group, or do you spread it out maybe more widely amongst people you don't know? Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Let me add that there is a famous game, Ultimatum game. I think it has been tested in several cultures. So I don't have the results. I know that there are differences. In particular, when you make someone from India playing against someone from another country, then if they are from the same country, the behavior are usually the same. But I remember that when you let play someone from India, if you are the proposer and you know that you are playing against someone from India, you will have a completely different behavior. So let me take the last question and then we stop.
Hi. My question is about self-interest as a concept in economics that you're challenging with your presentation. It has been like the foundation of economics, like everyone seeking his own or her own interest will be, community will be better off with the invisible hand of the Adam Smith, the famous invisible hand. So how, according to this evolutionary game theory, we're all changing the whole paradigm of economics from a whole community thinking instead of self-interest thinking. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, you mentioned the invisible hand, and of course, the donation game is the prime example for showing that the invisible hand does not always work, that each one trying the best for himself is not leading to a good social outcome. But you challenged the notion of selfishness as a basis for human behavior, and I agree with you, there is a lot more than selfishness there. But famous psychologist Jonathan Haidt, I think, said that if I had to resume human nature in 5 seconds, I would say selfishness. If I had 5 minutes, I would add a lot of other factors, yes? But if you reduce it to this primary, then selfishness, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carl, Sigmund, great talk, Carl. Thank to Ed, thank to Sarah, thank to the audience, and thank to UM6P.
And thank you so much for facilitating this session. Let's give them a round of applause once again. Thank you so much.
You were so kind to me.
So many takeaways I've kept from this session, ladies and gentlemen. This was a fascinating one. Much gratitude to the UM6P Moroccan Center of Game Theory, directed by Rida Al-Iraqi. This was definitely insightful. Professors have illuminated us with several key insights, and I would like to share some with you. Game theory is really rooted in mathematical science, employing stochastic processes, dynamical systems, equilibria, and attractors. It, includes behavioral science, utilizing both laboratory and field experiments to understand the patterns of behavior. And we've had some examples of those field experiments, which was absolutely fascinating. It finds applications across numerous disciplines, as we saw, including biology, social sciences, economics, operations, research, and language. And across these diverse disciplines, a common thread emerges, right? We've heard that the dynamics of evolution shape phenomena such as norms, mutations, cooperation, defection, and I've also noted reciprocity and extinction. Much gratitude again to Rida Al-Iraqi for making this happen, and we appreciate your contribution. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to our next session, which is named the Taking Care of the Soil, and I would like us to welcome together our esteemed speakers to the stage, and I'm calling now Louise Fresco, former president of Wageningen University. She's a writer and a researcher. Let's give her a round of applause as she's making her way to the stage. Welcome to you, madam. I'm calling also Monsieur Daniel Naou, ancien directeur général de la recherche, ancien conseiller du ministre Claude Allègre et ancien président du CIRAD. Ladies and gentlemen, this session will be both in English and in French, so if you need live translation, please know that there are headsets available for you at the main entrance. I'm giving you heads up so you could take a few minutes. Bienvenue à vous, cher monsieur. Je vous en prie, prenez place. I'm calling also Mr. Mustafa Benzezoua, Professor, Director of the Geology and Sustainable Mining Institute at UM6P and the Green Energy Park. Let's give him a round of applause. And last but certainly not least, I'm calling Joanne Wallen, College of Agriculture and Environmental Science, UM6P. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you for the excitement. We appreciate that. Welcome to you all. It's such a pleasure and honor to have you with us on stage. Welcome to you, Joanne, as you're taking your seat. Such a pleasure to have you. We will have approximately 10 minutes for each speaker for the talk, and then after which we will open the floor for questions. As usual, this is really designed for you to be participants and interactive, so we'll make sure we'll leave some time for that. And we will begin with you, Mrs. Louise Fresco, as I'll do a brief introduction as you're taking place behind the lectern, if you wish. Let's give her a round of applause. So Louise Fresco is a Dutch scientist and writer known for her work on globally sustainable food production. She has been the president of the Wageningen University Research Executive Board. She's a professor and a corresponding member of Belgium's Royal Academy of Overseas Sciences. Just a brief introduction. We are very much looking forward to your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, the soil is very important. It supports us, it's full of good things, chemically good things. But before we talk about soil, I'd like to talk with you about the challenges ahead, and particularly the challenges for Africa, because I think that is really why we care about the soil. And let's do a little thought experiment. Be with me here. Let's take a plane and let's move up to the year 2200, so at the end of this century. And let's travel in this plane across Africa. What will we see? We will see a lot of cities. 60% of Africa's population will live in very, very big cities, cities of millions of people. The rural areas will be more or less empty. There will be water. There is a lot of water in Africa, contrary to what some of you may think. Africa has some of the very big rivers, the Nile, the Congo River, the Senegal River. It has some major lakes in Central Africa. And by the time we are in 2200, those lakes and rivers will all be used for extensive systems of irrigation. By the time we are in 2200, there will be approximately 4 billion people in Africa. That's more than doubling the population. In other words, there is an enormous challenge. But as I indicate to you immediately, there are also solutions. Africa, as we will see from our plane, has a lot of red soils. And these red soils, generally speaking, are very old soils. They're devoid of a lot of organic matter. They're not very rich. There are some exceptions. There are some volcanic soils in parts of Africa. But generally speaking, African soils are not rich unless they are alluvial soils. But Africa has this huge potential for agricultural production. Agricultural production in Africa right now grows just at the pace of population growth. But Africa is extremely dependent on food imports and the imports of many other things. And why do I think there is such hope and such potential? Because I fundamentally believe that the sector for the future is going to be the agricultural sector, but it will look quite different from what it is today. First of all, we need food. Without food, no civilization. But we also need raw materials, not just the fibers for cotton or the wood or what have you, but increasingly, after 2050, we will need to do something to replace the petrochemicals that now come from fossil energy. You know, fossil fuels provide us with a lot of chemicals that are in fact fossil plants and which we will get directly from agriculture and not from fossil ancient sources. So agriculture will provide us with chemicals, with energy, with food, with fibers, with pharmaceuticals and all that. But we're still in our plane here in 2200. Where are the people who are going to be the agriculturalists? Who wants to be a farmer in 2200? Are they going to be farmers? That is a big question, because most young people in the rural areas, as you very well know, will be moving to the cities. So is the vision of the future one of very large farms with lots of tractors? Will it even be robotics? Will there be sensors? Will there be all kinds of ways of doing away with a lot of the manual labor and go into full-scale smart mechanization? I think so, probably. I think the time of taking a hoe and working the land is over. But we need to do all this in a sustainable way. And for that, the soil is absolutely essential. The soil cannot be used until it is taken care of. This is what is in the concept that some of you may know, regenerative agriculture. It means, first of all, looking at organic matter, a scarce matter in the case of most African soils. It means that we also have to cover the soil, because as soon as soil temperature goes over 30 degrees, the breakdown of organic matter is faster than the buildup of organic matter. And without organic matter, there's no biological activity in the soil, and soils will impoverish and erode even more. But what do we do with soils, even if we can improve soils, if there's no water? What should the water look like? Well, here I pointed already to the enormous possibilities that we have in Africa with surface water. I'm not talking about taking water from deep in the soil layers, but really looking at rainfall and surface water. Yes, it's not very easy in North Africa to think about using, for example, the water of the Senegal River, let alone the Congo River, so far away. But nothing limits us to imagine that there could be large-scale water transportation. Nothing limits us to think about desalination, which already takes place. All that can be done far more efficiently. So there is an enormous potential for Africa. However, it hasn't come into being today. About, I think, 20 years ago, the African governments signed the Maputo Declaration, the declaration to spend a sizable proportion of gross national products on agriculture. This has not happened. There's not one African country that has made true, over time, that commitment to agriculture. So that's our first real problem. If it doesn't come from public sources, it must also come from private sources and private investment. And yes, there is this enormous potential, but we need to make that step to use that private potential. Secondly, as you very well know, you cannot talk about agriculture without looking at the entire chain, from the inputs, the fertilizers, all the way down to the consumer. We need an integrated approach. And all African countries I know, and I think I know, with one or two exceptions, I know all of them, have no integrated department to take care of food, agriculture, and environment. So as long as this remains fragmented, we cannot have agricultural development, we cannot really work on improving the soil and improving agriculture. And this is not all, because we need food, we need all these other useful things. We need also to keep the rural areas livable, because cities where there are millions of people living in poverty do not create a healthy society. But there's also this enormous challenge of climate change. As you know, climate change is going to be really, it is already there, but in many ways it will exacerbate a lot of the problems. Some parts of Africa will get even drier than they are today. Some parts will get hotter. In other parts, particularly in Central Africa, actually there may be more rainfall. So there's not one blueprint result. But what is very clear is that there is no other sector but agriculture that is actually able to fixate carbon in the way that agriculture can do that. Agriculture, particularly through grasslands and through trees, can actually really capture carbon and keep it there. No other sector can do that in the same way at the same scale. So for all those reasons, agriculture is absolutely essential. Unfortunately, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I think very few of you want to work either on soils or on agriculture. And that's my greatest worry. My first worry is who are going to be the farmers of the future, or the ones driving the robots and developing those, and who are going to be the scientists that build that future. They build a new agriculture, an agriculture that's sustainable, that doesn't waste chemicals, that doesn't waste water, and that provides all of Africa with what it needs, and does away with some of these very expensive food imports. So do we have those people? Even if there's only one person in this room today that could be convinced to do something about it, food and agriculture, I would already be very happy. Because we need innovation. And innovation in science and in agriculture and in soil management is not going to do the little steps, one or two, even better than before. No, it's thinking completely differently. It's thinking perhaps about urban agriculture, about artificial soils, about agriculture on substrates rather than soils. There are all kinds of ways of thinking of new models. And we need you, all of you, to help thinking about this creatively, so that we can have an Africa that feeds itself and that provides itself with all those organic molecules that are necessary for the future. There can't be a greater challenge for you than this. So I hope you will pick it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Louise Fresco, for this enlightening talk. We'll be back later on with some questions. I'd like us now to welcome to the lectern Monsieur Daniel Naon. Je vous en prie, pendant que vous prenez place, je vais procéder à une courte présentation. Monsieur Daniel Naon est directeur général de la recherche, ancien conseiller du ministre Claude Allègre, ancien président du CIRCAD, géochimiste des sols, professeur émérite ex-Marseille Université et membre de l'Institut universitaire de France, et j'en passe. Je ne fais pas honneur à votre longue carrière. Nous avons hâte de vous écouter. Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
I have a slide to... May I have my slide?
Absolutely.
I have a slide, please.
Let's please put up the
I
slides.
apologize for English, native spoken English, but I will speak in French because it's so easier for me to develop more faster what I want to say. Si l'on veut comprendre notre civilisation, où on va, ce qu'on va devenir, on doit comprendre ce qu'ont été les anciennes civilisations et ce qu'elles sont devenues, pourquoi certaines d'entre elles ont disparu. Il y a des leçons à tirer de l'histoire. Pour les sols, si on veut comprendre les sols et si on veut comprendre comment le sol va nourrir et sauver le monde avec le changement climatique, il faut savoir comment s'est formé le sol. Et vous allez être surpris, en particulier pour le sol africain. C'est une très longue histoire. Vous avez projeté... non, la première, s'il vous plaît. La première. Please, the first slide. Bon, elle ne veut pas venir.
Il y a un pointeur juste à côté. On va vérifier que, autrement, on va pouvoir vous assister. Voilà, vous pouvez l'utiliser.
J'appuie en retour.
Voilà, vous appuyez sur le vert là. Voilà.
Voilà, parfait. Merci beaucoup. Vous voyez cette courbe en vert, c'est tous les calculs qui ont été faits grâce au delta de l'oxygène sur la reconstitution des températures dans le monde depuis à peu près 55 millions d'années. Vous avez une période que l'on appelle l'Éocène, Éocène, qui veut dire l'aube nouvelle, où tout le monde moderne s'est installé. Ça a été une des périodes les plus chaudes que la Terre ait connue, et cette période la plus chaude était une période qui était avec une température au pôle qui était de plus de 10 degrés que ce qu'elle est actuellement. On y trouvait des palmiers, enfin tout le monde était tropical. Et pendant 5 millions d'années, sous cette chaleur, sous cette humidité très forte, l'Europe était des îles dispersées. Il y a eu une altération des roches silicatées très importante qui ont donné naissance à presque tous les sols que vous avez en Afrique, ou de moins toutes les racines des sols africains. Mais quand je parle de sol, je parle non seulement des quelques dizaines de centimètres de la surface, mais les quelques dizaines de mètres qui sont dessous et qui proviennent de l'altération des roches. Toutes les grandes bauxites, tous les grands gisements qu'on tire de l'altération des roches se sont faits à cette époque. Et vous voyez que pendant ces quelques millions d'années, pendant cette chaleur, le weathering, rock weathering, ce qui a altéré les roches pour les transformer en sol, a été un consommateur considérable de gaz carbonique. Et c'est pendant ces longues altérations que le gaz carbonique a été pompé par le sol. Et brutalement, l'effet de serre a disparu et on a eu, à la limite de l'Éocène et de l'Oligocène, c'est-à-dire il y a 34 millions d'années, ce qu'on appelle une grande coupure, et big break, et big crunch, où les températures ont chuté brutalement. Et à ce moment-là, d'ailleurs, on a eu une hécatombe terrible dans les faunes, et j'espère qu'il y a des spécialistes des phosphates ici, je pense qu'on devrait trouver un âge au phosphate marocain exactement de cette... À la coupure, à 34 millions d'années, ça doit être l'âge de l'hécatombe marine qui ont formé les phosphates marocains. Il est terrible, hein, il ne veut pas rester. Bon, tant pis. Et c'est à partir de ce moment qu'est apparue la grande calotte antarctique de l'Oligocène et les grandes glaciations. Et vous voyez que depuis, à part un peu à la fin de l'Oligocène et au Miocène, où on a eu des remontées de température, les pôles ont glacé, les températures ont chuté et on est rentré dans les dernières phases dans des glaciations importantes qui ont permis d'avoir une calotte glaciaire sur l'Arctique, c'est-à-dire le pôle Nord. Quand je dis avoir une calotte glaciaire, aujourd'hui dans le sud, on a à peu près 4 à 5 km de glace. 4 à 5 km de glace, et c'est ce qu'il y avait à peu près en Arctique. On se trouve depuis, vous voyez que les niveaux de la mer également ont descendu, mais c'est à ce moment-là que les grands sols africains se sont formés et ont commencé à évoluer. Ça veut dire qu'on ne peut pas considérer l'histoire d'un sol sans son ensemble avec son weathering profile. On ne pourra pas considérer les grands problèmes de l'Afrique au point de vue agriculture, au point de vue richesse même, parce que ces altérations de roches ont concentré beaucoup de choses, beaucoup de métaux, beaucoup d'oligo-éléments. On ne peut pas considérer sans concevoir que le sol a une tête et un corps et des pieds. Je vous donne juste un exemple concernant le CO2. Quand on mesure le CO2 à la surface d'une forêt tropicale, à la base, c'est-à-dire à la surface du sol, on a à peu près 40 fois la valeur en carbone qu'à l'atmosphère. C'est dû à la minéralisation par le biome du sol. Quand on mesure dans la rivière qui draine ces grands paysages, la valeur de carbone dans l'eau est équivalente à celle de l'atmosphère, ce qui fait dire à beaucoup de gens que le carbone a été entièrement minéralisé, ce qui est faux. Le carbone a migré à l'intérieur du weathering profile, où il est gardé par les argiles. Et il suffit d'avoir une destruction de ces mécanismes et leur transformation en podzol pour voir cette concentration apparaître de matière organique et teinter des fleuves entiers comme le Rio Negro ou le Congo de matière organique, mais à ce moment-là, ils vont drainer des weathering profiles qui sont en train de s'effondrer. Donc même pour la mitigation climatique, il va être important de considérer le sol dans son ensemble. Si l'on ne fait pas ça, on passera à côté d'un grand problème et on passera à côté de la compréhension des mécanismes de la séquestration du carbone en profondeur. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation. Merci mille fois. Nous reviendrons tout à l'heure vers les questions, pour prendre quelques questions du public. I would like us please to welcome a wonderful PhD student. He was supposed to moderate this session. I just got the information. We really want to make this week about the engagement in PhD students. So let's encourage him and give him a warm applause as he's stepping on stage. He has been preparing for this and to introduce our esteemed speakers for a while, so I don't want him to miss out on this opportunity. Let's give it up for Yassine, please. Welcome to you, Yassine. I'll let you please introduce our next speaker, and I'll be just here if you need me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I guess since the overall theme is transition, we're transitioning from moderator to the other. Moving on to the same workshop, we're working on soil, which is the medium that gives birth to our food, filters our water, and recycles our waste. Moving on to our next speaker, Professor Mustafa Benzazour. Professor Mustafa Benzazour is a renowned figure in the field of mining and environmental, waste management and mineral processing and renewable energy. He is currently the director of the GSMI, Geology Sustainable Mining Institute, and also the director of Green Energy Park, and he's ranked one of the top 2% scientists at UM6P. Thank you, Professor Mustafa. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde, je vais faire ça aussi en français pour aller vite parce que j'ai peut-être trop de slides par rapport au message que je voudrais passer et pour inciter le débat bien sûr qui va être très enrichissant, j'en suis sûr. Vous pourrez bien sûr poser vos questions en anglais et je répondrai avec plaisir. Donc, je pense professeur Naon a bien expliqué c'est quoi un sol et je ne vais pas revenir là-dessus, mais sachez que quand on parle d'un bon sol, un mauvais sol, un sol qui est pollué, un sol qui est dégradé et ainsi de suite, c'est parce qu'on est venu changer sa composition, que ce soit en termes de matière organique, des minéraux qui le composent. Je dois souligner, et c'est peut-être le message que je veux passer aujourd'hui, que ces minéraux viennent d'une altération, le weathering, donc l'altération minérale d'une roche initiale, c'est la roche source, et la composition du sol final est souvent liée à cette roche. Souvent, c'est des phénomènes qui prennent énormément de temps, des milliers, sinon des dizaines de milliers d'années comme processus. Malheureusement, l'homme, avec ses activités, souvent, on ne pense pas à ce processus qui est très lent et on vient avec des actions, des fois sur une courte durée, sachant que l'homme a des besoins vis-à-vis de ce sol et on cause bien sûr sa détérioration et la détérioration des écosystèmes. Donc, la première question qu'on pourrait se poser, c'est est-ce qu'on comprend bien l'origine de ce sol? Donc, Daniel a bien expliqué que c'est un complexe phénomène qui dure des années et donc il faudrait faire très attention. Est-ce qu'on est en train de le surexploiter, ce sol? Et bien sûr, ma collègue au début a parlé de l'agriculture. Moi, je dirais que c'est peut-être le premier utilisateur des sols sur Terre. Ensuite, on a d'autres types d'actions qui sont très nuisibles pour le sol. C'est tout ce qui est construction, matériaux de construction. Vous savez que les matériaux de construction, je vais donner des données à la fin, c'est peut-être un des produits que l'homme consomme le plus en termes de béton, en termes de ciment, en termes de briques, en termes de carrelage, tout ce qui est utilisé dans le développement des territoires, c'est des grosses consommations. D'où viennent ces matériaux? Souvent, ils sont empruntés dans des carrières, des bancs d'emprunt, des sablières, etc. Et ça permet automatiquement de détruire les sources d'emprunt. Il y a d'autres, bien sûr, utilisations beaucoup plus restreintes, mais juste vous sachiez qu'il y a beaucoup d'utilisations. Vous savez, on est très attaché ici au Maroc à notre poterie, à nos carrelages typiques marocains, mais sachez que là aussi, pour faire ces objets d'art, on est obligé de détruire souvent des territoires importants, des sols argileux, c'est l'argile qu'on cherche, sans oublier donc l'intérêt pour la brique qui est très utilisée malheureusement dans beaucoup de constructions ici au Maroc. Et tout ça, c'est parce qu'on a oublié les constructions qu'on faisait à l'époque avec des matériaux plus nobles et plus respectueux, en tout cas pour l'environnement. bien sûr, si je reviens sur cette slide, donc c'est aussi les plages. Vous savez, les plages, c'est peut-être la barrière qui permet de séparer la terre des océans et des mers, et là aussi des exploitations souvent très désastreuses. On vient à coups de camion chargé, des fois la nuit, des fois même en plein jour, et ça cause des gros problèmes. Les plages, sachez que c'est aussi des sols à leur manière qui sont importants dans l'écosystème en général. Les mines, parce qu'on est dans une région minière, vous savez, les mines exploitent aussi des terrains importants. Ça peut se chiffrer en milliers d'hectares. Et bien sûr, quand on fait ce genre d'exploitation qui sont importantes, hein, si on a besoin de la ressource minérale pour diverses utilisations, c'est parce qu'on va déranger des superficies très très importantes. Donc les mines, et si je cite le cas de l'OCP, souvent on va avoir des solutions déjà faites pour ce qu'on appelle la réhabilitation. Sauf que dans le cas de l'OCP, comme c'est des mines qui ne fermeront peut-être jamais parce qu'on a des réserves super importantes, c'est que cette réhabilitation doit se faire de façon progressive au fur et à mesure. Donc maintenant, c'est quoi les solutions? Donc nous, en tant que géologues, en tant que chercheurs au sein du Geology et Sustainable Mining, on essaie d'avoir notre approche par rapport à la réhabilitation de ces sols. Et donc, on voudrait peut-être essayer d'imiter ce que la nature a fait pendant des millions d'années, mais je vous assure que ce n'est pas un processus qui est facile. Donc, si on veut réhabiliter un site minier qui peut faire des milliers d'hectares, souvent ça peut se faire à l'aide, par exemple, d'amendements pour corriger la composition de ce sol, des amendements organiques pour ramener le fameux carbone qui est très très important pour la revitalisation de ce sol. Et bien sûr, par la suite, il faut aller chercher les plantes qui sont réputées comme étant les plantes qui vont peut-être aider à installer et à revitaliser ces sols. Et donc, on a tout un groupe qui travaille dans ce domaine. On peut citer aussi, toujours en restant dans la région, la problématique des sols salins. Pour ce qui est des sols salins, ce qu'on a compris, c'est que la géotechnique, donc les paramètres géotechniques des sols, ont une grande importance dans les problèmes de salinité que connaissent les sols au niveau de Hamna. Et bien sûr, on peut aussi, à travers des amendements, et qui peuvent être, dans ce cas, des amendements issus d'autres industries. Je cite dans la photo du bas, par exemple, la mine Qtara, pour ceux qui connaissent un peu l'exploitation de la mine Qtara, qui fournissait en soufre la chimie des phosphates. C'est une mine qui est fermée, qui est bien sûr très polluée à cause d'un manque de réhabilitation dans ce site. Mais ce qu'on a trouvé, c'est peut-être ce qu'il faut comme minéraux qui peuvent corriger justement la composition un peu trop alcaline, trop carbonatée des sols qu'on va retrouver dans Hamna. Et donc ça pourrait constituer un amendement, et on viserait à ce moment-là des symbioses entre des industries. Donc certaines industries pourraient alimenter avec leurs déchets, qu'on peut qualifier à un moment donné comme déchets, mais qui peuvent devenir des sous-produits avec une certaine valeur ajoutée et constituer des intrants pour d'autres industries ou pour les objectifs de réhabilitation. Et enfin, pour revenir sur cette question de matériaux de construction, vous voyez ici au niveau de la figure, les matériaux de construction, c'est de loin après les métaux, le charbon et ainsi de suite. Peut-être la ressource qui est la plus exploitée pour faire des granulats, pour faire du ciment, pour faire des matériaux de construction divers, pour la construction des routes. Donc on reste dans le génie civil. Et donc nous, beaucoup de nos projets en lien avec l'OCP, c'est de dire peut-être que beaucoup de sous-produits, on a du calcaire, il y a de l'argile, il y a des marnes, il y a tout ce qu'il faut comme panoplie ou comme typologie au niveau des lithologies qui peuvent servir soit dans une cimenterie pour faire du ciment ou soit pour fabriquer des matériaux de construction ou soit pour être des intrants dans les sous-couches routières pour la construction des routes. Et je vous remercie.
Thank you, Professor Mustafa, for this interesting intervention. Moving on to our last distinguished speaker, Professor Joanne Kewalin. Joanne Kewalin is a James McGill professor at McGill University and an affiliate professor here at UM6P. She's also holds an adjunct professor position with the Northeast Institute of Geography in Agroecology at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Her research focuses on soil fertility and ecology in agroecosystems. Thank you, Professor Joanne, for joining us, and please take over.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure. And thank you, colleagues, for setting the stage. I'll add 1 or 2 points just to say, when you have 4 people talking about soils, you'll have 4 different perspectives, and I'm going to give you another perspective on the matter. So our topic is transitions, and I'm going to tell you 3 small stories about the transitions that are happening in the world of soil science related to soil mapping, soil biology, and soil health. So the first one is about soil mapping. I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in digging a soil pit. This is a really fun activity, and it builds muscles, and it's good for your health. And it's very, very difficult, as you can see, because you have to dig a very deep hole to look in the soil and see how the soil is made. When this is done, you have the information about what exists in that one hole in the world. So what do we do with this information? We can't dig holes everywhere to understand what is going on with the soils of the world, but luckily, because of computer science, geographical information systems, we now, today, are able to take points from many places in the world and develop large-scale maps. And this is a map of the soils of Africa. It's a digital map, and it gives you certain wonderful advantages because this map is dynamic. It's not just what was found in that hole at one point in time. It is a map that is based on the soil and also based on satellites, on remote sensing. And so you get a dynamic picture of how the soil is working, how it's functioning, and from this, you can do great things. You can make agronomic recommendations. And because it's based on satellite imagery, which now is very precise, you can get down to details about the soil. The map is very big, obviously. It's for the whole continent, so you can't get too much detail from a continental map. But we can pinpoint spots on the map, and we can provide more detailed recommendations to help farmers save water, save fertilizer, save money, and produce better crops and have a better livelihood. So that's the first transition that's going on, and this is current. This is going on now. This map that you see here is the culmination of 150,000 soil samples. So you can imagine how this works. This is not the individual effort of one person. This is collective intelligence that's being put into these large-scale maps. It requires all of us, doesn't it? Transition number 2, soil biology. I'm sure many of you took a course in microbiology, and it was a lot of fun, wasn't it? Because you went into the lab and you had a little plate like this one and you grew some organisms on it, and it was really fun to see those colonies forming. But the exciting thing about soil is maybe only 1% of the soil microbes will actually grow on those plates. And what we find through the magic of molecular biology and metagenomics is something quite extraordinary. A genomic catalog of soil microbes was published in Nature Communications in 2023, and it revealed some very, very interesting things. Namely, among them, that out of all the metagenomes in the world, most of the species in them, almost 80% of all the species in the metagenomes, have never been described before. So if you think, hey, I want a new frontier, I want to do something where nobody knows anything, soil microbiology is the place for you. So students, you want to do something unknown, nobody knows? Soil microbiology. And in addition to just describing, oh, there's some species there, maybe we should give them names, that's fun, but you can also look at their functions, and you can look at their interactions. For instance, in this paper, it's clear, 85% of the species they found are interacting with viruses in a way that's never been described before. So lots of scope for imagination, lots of scope for creativity. Number two, soil biology. The third transition that we need to think about is the transition into the field of soil health. Soil health, it's an idea. You think a healthy soil, healthy food, healthy people. It's easy to say, oh, it's healthy, but even yourself, how do you know you're healthy? How do you know? You go to the doctor, you say, am I healthy? And what did they do? They take some measurements. And so that's how we started with soil health. We said, oh, well, we need to take measurements. So the doctor takes your blood pressure, they take your temperature, they measure your heart rate, they say you're fine. You say, are you sure? You say, yes. All in the normal range, you're good to go. Same for soil. We were trying for so long. We said, well, let's measure the physical and the chemical and the biological. And then soil scientists, like my colleagues and I, we would argue about this. We'd be like, no, that one's not really good. You shouldn't really use that one. Oh, that one's the best one. So we'd argue about it for a long time. We calculated things, we calculated indices, but now we have a new approach. We say, it's not just about what's measured in the soil. The soil is connected to everything. The soil is part of an ecosystem. The soil provides services. It provides building materials. It provides food. It sequesters carbon. It does a whole lot of things. And so now we have a more holistic view, and we think about soils as part of a system. And we call this ecosystem multifunctionality. It's a good concept because now we put people back with the soil. It's not just a bunch of measurements in the lab. So when you think about soil health, think the soil's doing a whole bunch of good things for life, for me, for animals, for plants. Let's take care of it. Let's do all the good actions that my colleagues were talking about. Keep it covered, give it organic matter, give it a little water, and you'll have a healthy soil. And then we're all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rilwan Whalen, for presenting this interesting presentation. Now, while finishing this workshop, I would like to thank you all. I feel honored as well as humbled standing before you. Right now, we dug into the soil workshop, and now we need to sow the seed of change and the seed of knowledge. And it starts with us as PhD students and as scientists. So now I'm officially opening the Q&A session. So if anybody has a questions, please don't hesitate. Yes? The guy over there? Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very insightful. Like you covered the topic from different perspectives. We know that there is many effort are being conducted right now to find solution and to implement sustainable practice mainly for agriculture to preserve soil health. My question is, what are the efforts that are being implemented right now to include farmers in this process so they can implement these sustainable, eco-friendly agricultural practices to preserve soil health? Thank you.
Are you addressing this to me?
Actually, my question was directed to Professor John. So, but if you would like to answer the question, I would be happy to have your answer. So.
I'm very happy that you're asking me the question, but I really want to pass it to Louise Fresco, who has worked a lot more with farmers in Africa than I have. So I'd like to give her the chance to give the first impression.
This is what is called passing the buck. Huh? But I think you're right, the role of farmers is going to be very important. However, as you probably also know, the sons and daughters of farmers don't necessarily want to be farmers. So, to put it differently, the number of farmers in Africa will not increase, but will rather decline, even if population will double. So what is extremely important is to involve those farmers who are really interested in innovation. And there are here and there some efforts to create clubs of farmers, of young farmers, exchanging knowledge. I think here the internet can help a lot because some farmers are isolated, and by providing internet discussion groups and online information on new practices, particularly on sustainability, will help enormously. However, you're quite right, this is not happening systematically, and I think looking at ways also to reach out from agricultural research institutes to farmers and involving farmers through all kinds of citizen science approaches. For example, having them look at their soil microbiology and so on would increase the interest in sustainability, and I think that's a very good idea. And I hope that all students in agriculture and soils and food and what have you will actually reach out to the farmers and do their practical work with farmers. This has to be a two-way process. In some countries, farmers are grouped in federations and they do have a strong voice, in others they do not. And so this is something we need to stimulate. The more their practices can be taken into account, and the more they can be helped to move beyond the more back-breaking, hard work farming into something new and innovative that is exciting, that appeals to their entrepreneurship, the better it is. Thank you for the question.
I'd like to add a compliment to that because there are actually several initiatives here at UM6P that you may want to look into and you would like to get involved with. And I would look at Napier, which of course is a wonderful organization. We see the founder is in the audience with us today, and gratitude. They have extension efforts all throughout Morocco to interact with the farms and be on the ground and accompany the farmer, which is making a great difference in the communities. Second thing that we might involve you in is AgriEdge and AgriTech Center of Excellence. This group has done amazing things with schools for young people in involving them in the development of new digital technologies that are helping to do a more precision and very accurate farming in the field. This is bringing new capacity into the African continent because these schools have gone on in Côte d'Ivoire and in Morocco and in several other places. We've met people who were involved with it from a number of countries in the MENA region. And so let's give it up to those people who are making a huge effort to bring new technologies and bring training to the young folks who can encourage the farming community. Thank you.
I guess also Professor Naon wants to add to the same question.
M'entendez? Oui. Juste pour rajouter un petit mot, mais ça allait tout dans le bon sens. Luis Fresco nous a expliqué tout à l'heure le rôle que vont jouer les villes avec un maximum de population. Ça veut dire que les principaux radiateurs de la planète seront les villes. Il faut redéfinir tout à fait les transitions qui existent aujourd'hui entre les campagnes, le monde rural et les villes. Ça, c'est la première des choses. La deuxième des choses, c'est qu'il faut redéfinir le rôle de l'université. Il faut que ces universités deviennent des lighthouses, des living labs. C'est-à-dire, il faut que ces universités ne forment pas que des prix Nobel, mais servent les populations. C'est-à-dire qu'elles doivent former des intermédiaires entre les gens qui trouvent des recherches de pointe, qui adoptent des techniques de pointe, et le petit agriculteur qui doit les employer et qui doit connaître son sol. Et ça, le meilleur lien, ce sont ce qu'on appelle les extension agents. Et il est indispensable qu'une grande université, désormais, fasse et crée des agents de vulgarisation pour informer les petits paysans. Non seulement ça, mais il faut que la recherche soit aussi orientée vers les problèmes que les petits paysans ou les utilisateurs ont à résoudre.
Professor Naon, moving on to the second question.
Yes, thank you. My name is Wangare Kuria, a farmer from Kenya. I'll be presenting tomorrow morning, so I'm hoping to see the professors as we have that discussion. My question is on, we are a training center that demonstrates on how farmers can adapt to climate change in East Africa. And one of the strategies that we employ is aquaculture, fungi farming, hydroponics. And my concern is on how is our anatomy dependent on these minerals that we are skipping by going through soilless agriculture? What is the possible long-term effects, if any? Thank you.
Okay, I think we are doing again a 2-3 person act here. Well, let me be clear on hydroponics. Hydroponics, for those of you who do not know, is the use of some kind of substrate with some kind of nutrient solution and growing, in fact, plants outside the soil. This works very well in a protected environment, such as a greenhouse. It's expensive, and therefore it actually, for the time being, works only with vegetables that have a high value, especially if they are counter-season vegetables. It's a very, very sustainable system because, in fact, nothing gets out. And once the system is in, you only need to add a few nutrients, and all the control can be biological. And so you can have enormous yields on hydroponics. To give you an idea, about 80 kilos per square meter, which is huge. This is about 10 times what you get in the open field. But hydroponics, of course, cannot feed Africa. It will be very, very specific. So your question also refers, I think, to how can we, in general, improve soil structure and improve the possibility of beneficial bacterial life and biome in the soil, so that we have some of that water retention capacity, some of that nutrient exchange, and particularly also some of that carbon sequestration. And that is not something that happens overnight. I think from my own experience that particularly in some of your soils, of course, in Kenya are among the better soils in Africa. I'm not sure, you Kisumu side or the other side? If you are towards Lake Victoria, you have actually some better soils. But what is important is that you build up that bacterial activity slowly over time. It's far more complicated than just adding fertilizer at the beginning of the season and maybe once or twice in between and then hoping for the best. And in fact, I'd like to take up something what my other colleagues said. The key word of the future in agriculture and in soil management is going to be precision. precision agriculture, precision management, so that we know exactly what we're doing. We might be modeling some of that, and we do that over time, because there are no miracle solutions in this very complex interaction that soil is a living organism that take place. But I think by doing this precision biological / physical work on soils, we're going to greatly enhance yields in Africa in the long term.
Okay, moving on to the
Hello?
third question.
Yeah,
Yes,
Salma Mohib, I'm PhD candidate in African Genome Center. So I'm so grateful, I'm so pleased to attend to this conference, taking care of soil. So first, I would like to answer to one of the questions that Professor Louise was already mentioned in her presentation, which is, are they here any scientists or future scientists that they are responsible of all the things that we are living now regarding the soil, which is the black box. I'm one of the PhD students. I'm so pleased to answer that I'm responsible, and I'm here for that. I mean, I'm responsible of all the climate change that they are living now, and all the problems that we are facing in our Mother Earth. And my questions will be for Professor Juan. You were mentioning that the black box, which is soil, it's a multifunctional ecosystem. Do you confirm that it's crucial to take a polydisciplinarity studies for we can decipher the strategies and the abilities of this black box? Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Selma. Okay.
You were mentioning, regarding the genomic part, that there is a big fraction of the microorganisms that we are not capable to cultivate. And to answer even to Professor Louise, I can confirm that we were able to develop new strategies to cultivable, new microorganisms that they are not capable and not reported yet on the database, which is new, and I think Professor Juan is aware of that, and it's gonna be a big publications that's gonna be published soon here from UM6P. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing, Selma. So exciting things happening at UM6P. Delighted to hear what you're doing over in AGC. And the question comes in here about all the different functions. Yes, multifunctional. How do we deal with this? Can we put ourselves into categories now? Do we say, oh, I am soil chemistry, I am soil fertility, I am whatever? I don't think it works that well anymore. Maybe, back in a number of years ago, you could say I am purely X or Y or Z, but what we seem to understand is that the ecological mind frame forces us to consider physical, chemical, biological, biochemical. It forces us to think of the soil not just as a crumpled up sample. I mean, how do we take samples? We grab soil and it was in a structure, and then we break it apart. And we mix it all together to homogenize it, and we take a subsample out of that and we make a measurement. But it destroys the actual home of all those microbes. It seems to not express the real habitat in which they're living, the real conditions in which they may be in a small pore filled with water in the midst of a soil that seems relatively dry. They may be in a zone where there's a lot of nutrients and everything else around is poor. So we have, in our sampling and in our macro human-centered approach, we don't appreciate the whole complexity of this heterogeneous environment. And so what do we need to understand better? Not only do we need the physical, chemical, biological, biochemical knowledge, but we need to use an ecological framework in which we construct the mathematical models that really reflect the reality of how the soil functions. And I find myself thinking more and more about pore space, for instance. I come from a biology fertility background. What am I doing in physics thinking about pore space? But I must. If I don't know where the water's going, if I don't know where the air is exchanging, I can't really understand why the organisms are there and why they're doing what they're doing. So let me encourage you all, think more, you'll think in your specialty, but try to think broadly. And when you reach the limits of what you know, and I do all the time, I find a friend. I find a scientific friend and I go talk to them and I try to get their input and their help. So science is like that, work with friends. Thank you.
Now we're taking the last question. Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Fatih Hashradi and I'm a member of UM6P team. I would like to react to Dr. Louis' intervention. You are wondering what the farming will look like within the end of this century, and I believe, within this room and within this university, we are all involved in this challenge. I have had the chance to be involved in a really fantastic adventure. I invite you and others to get in touch with the team within the UM6P. Being born and raised in Morocco, I have lived the policy and the national policy trying to fix population in rural area. And we understand that in 2024, we cannot do this anymore. It's not about surviving, it's about living with dignity, choosing a path, and as technology is opening eyes of all people about what is happening, we believe that our young people in rural area, they have the same expectation like my kid, these PhD students, you and I. So we should think about how can we make them not only dream about the best future for us, but to make sure that they can be the solution for us. And these people, and thank you, Dr. Joanne, for mentioning El Mutmir. El Mutmir within the College of Agriculture of UM6P is conducting a human initiative within Morocco and elsewhere, living with that community, and we will love to connect you with that people, and you will see and interact with farmers who will never leave the rural area, and they are doing well, they are earning money, they are raising their kids in the best universities around the world, and they are living from farming, not like what they do when they don't have something else to do, as a chosen business. And I believe the UM6P is deeply involved in that. I have a question, and you have just highlighted that maybe that the precision agriculture could be the solution. I'm almost 50, and I'm hearing about climate change and agriculture challenges and food security in Africa for 15 years. So the soil, we understand today that it's very complex, and it could be the solution. But from your perspective, and different perspectives from the different panelists, why we are not there yet? Is it about policy? Is it about the integrated approach, as it has been mentioned by the moderator? What is missing in Africa? And is there any successful use case you would like to share with us? Not an initiative. Is there any country doing well, connecting all dots in Africa with public policy, with technology, with education, and so on? We would love to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's an absolutely wonderful, not a question, but a statement as well. And I think that's very appropriate. There are lots of things I'd like to react to, but maybe let me start with the last part. What did we miss? And like, I'm a little bit older than you, but I've also spent nearly half a century on, trying to see what is wrong, why doesn't it work as much as we want? Because African yields are still relatively very, very low, even on good soils. They could be much, much higher. And to give you an example, Brazil, that has, for geological reasons, soils that are quite comparable to some of the African weathered soils, has much higher yields in some of the key crops. Why is that so? And Brazil is, in many cases, also a very complex country with a very strong stratification and so on. But they did one thing right. they had a rural and agriculture policy, and one which was serious, and one that helped people, local people, to also invest in rural areas. Whereas in many African countries, and don't take me wrongly, I don't want to say that this is true for all countries, the idea also promoted by the politicians was very often, if you don't go to the city, you're stupid. If you don't go to the city, you're backwards. So everybody wanted to go to the city, even if there was very little in terms of work. And for many years, of course, food on the world market seemed a cheaper option for many countries than trying to grow it at home. And it's not just the agricultural side, it's the added value that you get in the whole food chain. So, I mean, one of the most ridiculous examples, which still exists in Africa today, is that Africa produces some excellent coffee. It then goes to countries like Switzerland, where it's being processed, and goes back as freeze-dried, soluble coffee that you drink here. That is, of course, not how it should be. The processing of coffee should also be an African matter. So it's not looking at the whole chain, it's not investing, and again, it's not making true on the Maputo commitments. And when there was investment, it was short-term investment by people who also wanted to have short-term gain. And if there's one thing I've learned about agriculture in the course of the years, there are no magic solutions. It's not a quick win and run. So that long-term commitment and the long-term policy that goes with it is lacking in many, many countries. But you are right, there are examples where things are working, and there are some countries that have made some of these commitments, but then sometimes it's stopped again because there's a Ministry of Water Resources that doesn't work with the Ministry of, say, Rural Development. And it really requires some visionary people. And one person I have known personally who had that vision was Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the UN. He really believed that Africa had to be integrated both politically but also in terms of its disciplines. And I think the efforts that are being done here at this university to think about solid science but in an integrated and applied way is exactly the way forward. And that's probably the reason why you see me here so often. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Nolan, do you want to add?
Non? Oui? C'est bon. Merci, merci Louise. Je suis, comme Louise, même plus âgé, beaucoup plus âgé. Et on a connu un peu cette histoire de l'étude du sol. Et c'est important d'y faire référence. Surtout que maintenant, on ne parle jamais plus d'agriculture sans parler de changement climatique. Mais qu'est-ce qui se passait il y a 50 ans? On parlait d'agriculture et on se souciait simplement du climat actuel. On ne pensait pas aux grands changements climatiques. Et le monde était peuplé d'organismes qui avaient pour but d'augmenter la production agricole, tout en n'imaginant pas les adverse impacts que ça allait avoir sur l'environnement. C'est quand les gens du climat se sont intéressés au changement climatique qu'il y a eu une prise de conscience qu'il y avait un lien entre les deux. Et pendant très longtemps, le GIEC a ignoré, je dis bien a ignoré, l'agriculture. En 2010, il y avait le G77 qui a fait remarquer qu'il y avait une relation entre la production agricole et le changement climatique. Peu importe. C'est resté entre les mains du GIEC et c'est que bien plus tard que le GIEC a commencé à sortir des chiffres sur les problèmes d'agriculture. Ce que je dis là sur les grands organismes de recherche est aussi valable, mais à l'inverse, sur les grands organismes internationaux. Et je parle là sous le contrôle de Luis Fresco. Quand il y a eu la FAO au début, la FAO faisait de la science. Et puis à un moment donné, elle a arrêté de faire de la science, elle a fait de la politique. Et le problème, le plus dangereux est cela. On parle de transition, on parle tous de transition. Moi, je vous ai montré dans le climat un tipping point, à partir duquel le climat chute. Et on peut obtenir aujourd'hui, être à la veille d'un tipping point. Vous savez, il faut faire attention et discerner vraiment ce qui se fait scientifiquement, qui se fait au niveau et au niveau politique. Prenez juste ce qui se passe sur l'énergie. Quand vous voyez des beaux camemberts faits par les politiciens, on vous montre qu'on est passé de l'énergie du bois à l'énergie du charbon, de l'énergie du charbon à l'énergie du pétrole, de l'énergie du pétrole, etc. En fait, quand vous prenez des chiffres, il ne s'agit pas de transition, il s'agit d'addition. L'Angleterre utilisait en tant qu'énergie de bois moins de bois que quand elle a découvert le charbon. Il fallait étayer les galeries, il fallait se servir du charbon, etc. Puis pareil pour quand on a fait le pétrole. Et aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qu'on voit? C'est qu'on a doublé la production de charbon, on a doublé la production de pétrole. On n'a jamais eu de pic de charbon, on n'a jamais eu de pic de pétrole. On n'aura pas de pic de phosphore. On additionne. Ce ne sont pas des transitions noudiques, on appelle ça transition énergétique. Alors il faut faire attention pour l'agriculture, c'est exactement pareil. Il ne faut pas tomber dans le piège des manipulateurs politiques qui sont là aussi pour faire croire qu'ils avancent. Mais aujourd'hui, pour faire de l'acier, on a toujours besoin de charbon. C'est un réducteur. Alors, on fera de l'hydrogène. Mais aujourd'hui, 95% de l'hydrogène vient des combustibles fossiles. Donc, on additionne l'hydrogène. On n'a pas encore la transition. Et donc, il est important que dans les universités, il y ait des endroits dans ces universités où il y ait des réflexions profondes sur la globalité des choses, entre sciences humaines et sciences dures. Il faut qu'il y ait des réflexions là-dessus. C'est ça qui fera avancer entre le concept politique et le concept scientifique propre aux populations.
Thank you so much. Thank you, distinguished speakers. I am once again honored and humbled listening to you and being before you and presenting you as well. I would like to thank all PhD students and scientists as well. As we understood from our distinguished speakers that soil is not only a bunch of dirt, it's also a complex ecosystem. Sorry? A question, okay. Okay, because we're pressed by the time, but okay, one last question.
Really? Thank you. Thank you. I actually have 3 questions. I don't know if I can ask all of them. Okay.
Sorry, I guess we just pressed by the time because we have another session
Another
coming.
session? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll be
Thank you
very
so
quick.
much.
One is just a yes or no question. My name is Marwa. I'm a PhD student at the College of Agriculture. Thank you, first of all, for your presentations. Just to be quick, my first question is from Professor Mustafa. I just want to know if you've investigated the effect of growing some crops in the rehabilitated soils from the mine on the nutritional quality of those crops, and if not, if you're planning on doing it in the future. And my second question is for Professor Fresco. I would like to know if you could just expand. You've talked about integrative approaches and how they're overlooked, and I just wanted to know, since you have this long-term vision for agriculture in the future, if you have also a vision of how these integrative approaches and systemic approaches can be integrated in agricultural sciences. I don't know if I can add my third or not. Maybe if you have time for a third, otherwise I'll come and see you. Thank you.
Well, it's your decision if you want to answer or not. Yes.
Thank you for the question. Maybe it could be too much long to answer this question. Of course, we have many research activities about what kind of crops could be the most adapted for soil after rehabilitation. But actually, the question is, are we ready to rehabilitate this soil? Because this soil still contains important amount of phosphate, and maybe it could be the secondary ore bodies that could serve to have more phosphate. So it is a very important question. We are working on trying to reprocess these tailings and this waste to have maybe to reprocess to have more phosphate. And then we are also working on the optimization of crops growing within this kind of soil. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, thank you.
Well, you are asking me a very big question, which I will not answer in the 2 seconds that are left, but let me put it this way. I think we can do better in most universities by combining very solid scientific methodological work with problem-driven research. Because if you take a problem rather than a discipline, and the problem can be very easily, say, better yields, then it requires you to work with different disciplines, and that provides an integration at the intellectual level for students. And I think students that have been trained to think in terms of problems and solutions rather than in terms of scientific laws or something, will be better agents, whether they are working with governments or in entrepreneurial positions. And as I said this afternoon to the media people, I don't want us to stop teaching people when they're 22 years old. I mean, truly, in the way we work today with the problems that are facing us everywhere in the world, we must have a kind of éducation permanente. We must continue lifelong learning and giving people a chance to go back to refresher courses, to go to online courses. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening in terms of digital teaching and providing the possibility for integration and discourse and discussion that we never had even a decade ago. So again, I'm a technological optimist. I think we can work on that integration, but it has to be between your ears, as they say, in your head, otherwise you will not benefit from it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. As we said, as we stand on the precipice of change, we need to remember that the transition that we are having towards a sustainable future, we need to think right beneath our feet. The soil is not just a bunch of dirt that we can use, and if we just use it, it will deteriorate, which we've seen with Professor Daniel. And also we need when we talk about transition, is the transition of our point of view towards soil. So we don't just need to talk about the ecosystem of the soil, but it's also a complex ecosystem that involves water, involves air, involves also the whole geology structuring and the mining system. Also, we need to think of transitioning as not in soil as in biology, but also we need to introduce more mathematical modeling and simulating that can simplify our work. I would once again thank you for your presence, and thank you, dear professors. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for a fantastic session. Thank you to our distinguished guests. And let's give it up, everyone, for Yassine for doing a fantastic job in wrapping up this session. Thank you all. Please kindly stay with us in the room. We have a nice session coming up right after. I would like probably to have a quick introduction about this session as we're waiting for our next speaker to join. This session, ladies and gentlemen, is really about digital transition. I know many of you are, fond of our mobile phones, social media, metaverse, all this virtual world. And our next distinguished speakers will talk us through the border and the transition between the real world and this virtual world. I'm sure that we all relate to this as active consumers of the internet and the digital world. So I'd like I'd like us both to welcome on stage Professor Raphaël Allali. Let's give him a round of applause. And Professor Francis Heiligen, as he is joining us on stage. Welcome to you both. We're very much looking forward to this session, as we will be hearing first from each one of you. Few minutes, quick presentation. Welcome to you both. Please have a seat. We will first hear from each one of you, and then we'll open up the floor for some questions. So, Francis Heligen is a Belgian cyberneticist investigating the emergence and evolution of intelligent organization. He presently works as a research professor at the Dutch-speaking Free University of Brussels, where he directs the transdisciplinary Center Leo Apostel and the research group on evolution, complexity, and cognition. He is best known for his work on the Principia Cybernetica project and his model of the internet as a global brain and his contribution to the theories of mimetics and self-organization. Let's please give a round of applause to Francis Heligen as he's taking his way to the lectern, or do you wish to speak from here? Please feel comfortable to. So let's make sure the mic is on. Team Tech, if you could please put this one on for us. Thank you so much. There you go.
Okay. So I wanted to introduce the topic of today by sketching a little bit of the history of the World Wide Web, because I was, you might say, involved in that. So the World Wide Web was first started in 1991 by Tim Berners-Lee at CERN. And at about the same time, I was collaborating with two cyberneticists in the US, Cliff Jocelyn and Valentin Turchin, and we had started something that we called the Principia Cybernetica project. And the idea was that we would develop a kind of a philosophy of cybernetics, but in the form of something like an encyclopedia. But we wanted to do it in a way that would use the most advanced computer technologies of those days. That means the internet and what was known then as hypertext or hypermedia. So in 1990, we started already outlining a system like that based on the technologies that were then available, and the kind of system we had in mind actually was something very similar to the World Wide Web. So when Tim Berners-Lee came up with this World Wide Web, I immediately discovered it and thought, okay, that is exactly what we want. So I started developing my own World Wide Web site together with my two collaborators, and that was the first World Wide website in Belgium, and it was one of the first in the world. I mean, there was a list of about 200 websites in the whole world, and it was probably in those days the most complex or the most large ones, because we had already been developing this whole network of interlinked pages. We had already developed it not in web format, but in some other format. So it was relatively easy to start it up. So I have then been following this development of the World Wide Web, and we were anticipating that it would become more intelligent. So initially, the inspiration of Tim Berners-Lee was something like a library of interconnected documents, interconnected by hyperlinks, which is similar to the way the brain is organized. The brain organizes its memory in form of what's sometimes called an associative network or a semantic network, where concepts are connected by associations. So that analogy gave me the idea that we could see the World Wide Web as the beginning of what we then called a global brain. So a brain, a worldwide brain. And actually that was not such a new idea, because a number of other people had already been suggesting that already even in the 1920s and 1930s. People like Paul Otlet, who is the Belgian founder of information science, and H.G. Wells, the science fiction writer, had written a book called World Brain, and then Teilhard de Chardin developed this concept of the noosphere. So all of these ideas were ideas that were looking at some kind of a knowledge network at the level of humanity, at the level of the whole planet. And also Tim Berners-Lee was inspired by that, and the great, let's say, the great contribution of Tim Berners-Lee was that he connected this idea of hypertext, which also had been developed on standalone computers, with the emerging internet, which made it possible to have different pages reside on different computers, but still be linked directly. So, together also with another collaborator of mine, Johan Bollen, we then developed some algorithms that would show how the World Wide Web could become more intelligent, in the sense that it would learn to make links, that it would suggest things based on what you had done before. And in the meantime, all that has become indeed a very big technology that you all know. It's called recommender systems, and it's what you get if you look at YouTube. You watch a few videos and it will immediately recommend a whole bunch of other videos based on the patterns that you have expressed by browsing particular videos, by looking at particular pictures. But our idea was still to see the World Wide Web as a kind of a brain-like structure, something that eventually took shape in the form of Wikipedia. So we had our own kind of smaller encyclopedia on cybernetic systems theory, complexity, evolution. Wikipedia then finally became a kind of a large-scale implementation of what we had started to do. And so for me, Wikipedia is one of the biggest successes of the World Wide Web, and an example that still deserves to be emulated. Now, I want to say a little bit more about why Wikipedia was so successful. Writing an encyclopedia that will contain thousands, initially millions of pages on all possible subjects in the world, if you would ever have had put a team of scientists together to write such an encyclopedia, it would have taken decades and it would never have been as big. It would not have worked. So why did Wikipedia succeed and become so quickly the biggest encyclopedia in the world? Because they had this wiki ID. That means that you not only show people the text and the pictures and allow them to find text and allow them to link from the one to the other, you also allow them to write the text. And that is the great strength, that is that anybody who looks at the Wikipedia page, because typically they're interested in the subject, and notices that something is missing, or maybe that there is a minor mistake, it might even be a spelling mistake, or a date is wrong, that person can immediately correct it, can immediately add something, can immediately improve it. And I think that is a very powerful principle, and the principle is actually known originally in the theory of collective intelligence in insects. It's the principle of stigmergy. Stigmergy means that the trace of what you do, you leave a trace of what you do in the text you write, and others are then inside it, stimulated by the trace to add their own work. So stigmergy means that the work you do incites others to build further on what you're doing. And Wikipedia is the best example of that. Now, when we're speaking about the World Wide Web at this moment, then I'm a little bit less enthusiastic. In, let's say, the 1990s when we were doing that work, and then in the early 2000s, there was kind of this idea that the internet would be the great democratizer, that everybody would be freely creative. And what really happened was then that a number of companies took over, companies like Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, and so on, and they started building their own systems, which were more intended commercially. That means they were there to collect money, typically through advertisements. So you got the social media, and then we saw that there were a lot of negative effects that no one initially had foreseen, namely that people started using social software to produce fake news, to create addictive technologies, to put all kind of outrageous messages that would upset other people. So in that sense, I'm afraid that the World Wide Web at this moment is not really fully using all these positive abilities, and of course it remains a very strong, a very powerful thing to use, and especially Wikipedia is one of the greatest inventions ever. So I think we are here to discuss the future of the World Wide Web, so I would be curious to hear what people's questions and comments are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your thoughts. We'll definitely open up later on to questions once we've heard from you both. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you our next speaker, who you all know by now. Professor Raphaël Llaugier is very well known in the fields of sociology, philosophy, and cultural studies. He has published numerous books and articles contributing to academic and public debates. He is the scientific director of the Institute for Advanced Studies and the holder of the Transitions Chair at UM6P. And he has played a huge part in putting all this content together. So let's listen to Professor Llaugier and open up for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unlike my talk at the beginning of the week, I'm going to speak in French, just to balance a bit between French and English. I think it's nice sometimes to speak in your native language. Donc pour moi, je crois que ce qui est essentiel de comprendre avec Internet, c'est que pour l'anthropologue ou le sociologue ou le philosophe, c'est que c'est un espace d'interaction symbolique. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire, un espace d'interaction symbolique? Ça a l'air comme ça d'être compliqué, en fait c'est très simple. Ça veut dire que lorsque je suis en train de vous regarder, là c'est un espace d'interaction symbolique. Pourquoi? Parce que lorsque je vous regarde, très exactement ce que vous avez fait, au moment où je parle, vous avez fait ça avec la tête. D'accord? Et donc immédiatement, ça renvoie un symbole. C'est-à-dire, je vous envoie un symbole, qui est le langage, et puis ça vous renvoie quelque chose. Donc il se passe quelque chose entre les deux. C'est ce qu'on appellerait une mise en scène. Le monde social, c'est une mise en scène. Notre ego fonctionne en raison de la mise en scène. La preuve, si je vous dis quelque chose et que vous n'êtes pas d'accord avec moi, vous pouvez dire, en faisant ce que je déteste, moi, chez les étudiants d'ailleurs, souvent, je suis en train de parler, ils font ça, ils font... Alors là, je leur donne la parole immédiatement. C'est pire que d'être immédiatement en désaccord. Pourquoi? Parce que mon ego est touché. Donc c'est un espace d'interaction symbolique. Un espace d'interaction symbolique, c'est là où se construit ce qu'on appelle l'identité. Pourquoi? Parce que l'identité, c'est quoi? C'est je regarde quelqu'un, mon ego peut être touché ou ne pas être touché, je renvoie quelque chose, c'est-à-dire il y a un jeu de renvoi, interaction. La télévision, ce n'est pas un espace d'interaction symbolique. Lorsqu'il y avait seulement la télévision, les individus, il y avait une mondialisation qui s'est effectuée par la télévision, par exemple, ou par les médias. Ce n'était pas du tout pareil. Les effets n'étaient pas du tout pareils. Parce que vous regardiez la télévision, et il y a des études qui ont été faites là-dessus, ce qu'on appelle la théorie des effets limités, en sociologie des médias. On croit qu'il y a de la manipulation avec la télévision. Mais en fait, non. En fait, ce que ça fait essentiellement, c'est que vous regardez à la télévision une émission avec des gens qui sont en train de débattre et qui confirment vos préjugés, c'est-à-dire qui confirment ce que vous croyez déjà savoir. Alors qu'est-ce que vous vous dites? Vous êtes entre vous, parce que l'espace d'interaction symbolique, il n'est pas entre vous et la télévision, il est dans le salon, vous mettez la télévision, et là vous dites, c'est bien, hein, là vraiment, cette fois, ils sont de mieux en mieux sur cette télévision. Hein. Ça y est, c'est vraiment, ils sont de plus en plus intelligents, ils sont cultivés, etc. Parce qu'ils confirment. Si le lendemain, vous avez une émission où c'est le contraire de ce que vous croyez, c'est le contraire de ce qui a construit votre socialisation, vous allez dire vraiment n'importe quoi aujourd'hui. Hein. Vraiment n'importe quoi. Mais qui ils embauchent? Mais c'est journaliste, mais c'est vraiment dingue, mais c'est vraiment dingue. Oui, ça veut dire que ce qui prévaut, lorsque on construit son identité et la construction de son identité, c'est ce qu'un philosophe comme Paul Ricoeur appelle un régime de vérité. C'est-à-dire progressivement, ce que je considère comme vrai, comme beau, comme grand, comme fort, comme moche, comme etc. Et qui va déterminer aussi ma manière de m'habiller, d'imiter, de ne pas imiter, de jalouser, de ne pas jalouser, etc. Ben, ça se construit automatiquement dans un espace d'interaction symbolique. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut qu'il y ait un renvoi. En fait, donc ces espaces sont jusqu'à Internet, l'émergence d'Internet et des réseaux sociaux, ces espaces étaient toujours des territoires physiques. Moi, je distingue dans mes travaux, du coup, 3 niveaux d'espace d'interaction symbolique. Le premier niveau, c'est le niveau basique, c'est ce que j'appelle les identités, donc les espaces de désir, parce que c'est un espace de haine, de désir, de relation, etc., territorialisés dans un territoire. Alors à l'intérieur de ça, on a donc identité nationale, l'identité d'une ville, parce que l'identité du quartier, parce que je rencontre les gens le matin, l'identité dans mon foyer, parce que j'habite au même endroit. Et donc, je jalouse mon frère, ma sœur, ou alors j'ai des conflits. En ayant des conflits, je ne veux pas ressembler à mon frère, donc je veux ressembler à ma sœur à la place, etc. Et donc, ça construit des jeux de relations extrêmement puissantes entre les gens qui sont incorporés, comme disait le sociologue français Pierre Bourdieu, qui petit à petit font partie de moi, c'est ça qui devient mon identité, que je vais défendre comme si c'était plus que moi-même comme un autre, comme dit encore Paul Ricoeur, c'est comme ça que se construit l'ego individuel, et puis l'ego communautaire, puis l'ego familial, collectif, etc. Donc identité nationale, c'est encore un espace, hein, c'est l'espace national, identité de la ville, donc on s'identifie. Et puis l'identité religieuse, qu'est-ce que c'est? C'est parce qu'on se rencontre dans un espace qui va être une église, un temple, une mosquée, ou tout ce que vous voulez. Ça, c'est des identités territorialisées, parce qu'il y a des espaces d'interaction qui sont des territoires. Et les conflits, les guerres, les solidarités, elles ne se construisent que comme ça. Deuxième niveau, avec la première grande globalisation, c'est ce que j'appelle les identités ou les espaces de désir, c'est à peu près pareil, interterritoriaux. Par exemple, c'est les diasporas. C'est-à-dire, j'amène mon identité, elle est territoriale, parce que j'amène un territoire. Par exemple, si je suis français, me représentant d'origine algérienne ou venant d'Algérie, je transporte dans la banlieue lyonnaise mon territoire, que je vois comme étant mon territoire d'origine, sur place. Et donc, immédiatement, ça ne veut pas dire que je ne suis pas de ce territoire qui va être la banlieue lyonnaise, ça veut dire qu'il va y avoir une intrication entre mon territoire d'origine et le territoire qui... Mais c'est 2 territoires, ça peut être 3 territoires. C'est le moment de l'interterritorialité, cette première globalisation. Ce qui se passe avec Internet, c'est que pour la première fois dans l'histoire humaine, et c'est ça qui est vraiment inédit, je crois qu'on n'a pas encore mesuré l'extension et les conséquences majeures. Moi, j'ai essayé de travailler sur ces sujets, mais les conséquences majeures d'un espace d'interaction symbolique, mais sans territoire, déterritorialisé, ce que j'appelle dans les articles anglais « territoryless identities ». Et alors ça, c'est absolument fantastique, parce que ça veut dire que comme à la fois les haines, les répulsions, et à la fois les sentiments de solidarité, jusque-là, c'est effectué avec des jeux de distance géographique, c'est-à-dire je suis solidaire, ou alors je jalouse la personne qui est dans mon quartier, qui est mon voisin de palier, donc ça crée à la fois des conflits, des solidarités, qui par cercle concentrique géographique s'élargissent, etc., avec des histoires communes, évidemment, avec des histoires, avec une inertie historique. Bien ça, ce système, il va être, ça ne veut pas dire qu'il va entièrement disparaître, mais ce système, il va être complètement mis en cause par ces espaces de désir déterritorialisés. Il va être complètement mis en cause parce que, par exemple, le même individu qui habite, je vous donne un exemple, alors peut-être c'est un exemple qui est un peu sensible de nos jours, mais qui est réel, parce que je les ai étudiés dans une autre vie. Vous imaginez toujours ce même individu français d'origine algérienne qui vit dans la banlieue lyonnaise. Il a un voisin de palier qui se trouve être un juif séfarade. Il est très proche de lui du point de vue culturel, du point de vue de l'histoire, du point de vue ethno-culturel, comme on dit. Il est proche de lui du point de vue de son voisin de palier, mais il a l'impression que c'est son ennemi parce que via les réseaux Internet, l'Algérien, enfin le Français d'origine algérienne, se représente comme un Palestinien de l'intérieur. Et donc lorsqu'il y a une bombe qui est envoyée à Gaza, il a l'impression que c'est le séfarade qui est en face qui lui a envoyé la bombe. Et le problème, c'est que le séfarade, il croit aussi qu'il est persécuté par, justement, ce Français d'origine algérienne, qu'il voit comme étant un Palestinien qui lui en veut, une sorte d'allié objectif, avec des solidarités qui sont complètement distinctes. C'est-à-dire qui créent des distances symboliques qui ne sont plus commensurables aux distances géographiques et aux distances des modes de vie. Alors ça produit d'autres choses. Ça produit des micro-cultures globales, comme par exemple, moi, ce que j'avais étudié, le mouvement manga, avec des gens qui vont se retrouver dans des espaces d'interaction symbolique, c'est-à-dire ils se voient. C'est ça qui est intéressant. Ils se voient, ils se jalousent, ils se parlent, ils se renvoient, ils s'insultent. Alors après, il y a la question de la multiplicité des avatars dont aurait pu parler Olivier Servet, mais je ne vais pas développer. Parce qu'on pourrait penser que oui, mais ils se cachent derrière leurs avatars, parfois lorsque ce sont des avatars dans ces espaces. Mais nous nous cachons tous. C'est-à-dire que rien que la manière de nous habiller, de nous maquiller, de nous présenter, c'est une manière de se cacher à un certain niveau. On vit tous à travers des avatars, même dans ce monde réel. C'est-à-dire, quand je viens et que je fais le professeur d'université, je suis quelque part le professeur d'université, mais d'un autre côté, c'est mon avatar. Parce que quand je suis en famille, je ne me comporte pas de la même manière. Je m'habille d'ailleurs autrement. D'ailleurs, on s'habille de manière différente. Donc c'est qu'une extension de cette tendance humaine à multiplier les manières de s'habiller pour se présenter. Alors après, ça peut aller très très loin, puisque des gens se mettent complètement avec l'avatar qui va être une petite fille alors que lui, c'est un homme de 40 ans, ou inversement. Mais finalement, c'est qu'une extension de cette tendance humaine à la démultiplication de soi, à la démultiplication de l'ego. C'est jamais indépendant de ce que veut dire la personne par rapport à ce qu'elle est. Ce qui est une manière de s'habiller, c'est aussi ça. C'est ça qui nous fait être humain. Donc ce que je veux dire, c'est qu'on va avoir toute une série de conflits, de rapports de force qui vont être indépendants des territoires et des distances à un certain niveau, et en même temps des solidarités comme les mangas, c'est-à-dire quelqu'un qui vit au Japon, s'il fait partie d'un groupe manga sur Internet, il va s'habiller de cette manière-là, et il va se sentir parfois plus proche d'un adepte des mangas aux États-Unis ou en France que de ses propres voisins, de ses propres amis. C'est unique dans l'histoire humaine. Cette façon c'est unique comme façon de sentir des solidarités avec des gens que physiquement on n'a jamais rencontrés, mais on se sent intime, mais vraiment intime, quoi, à un certain niveau. Où on sent, c'est vraiment des ennemis, mais mon voisin de palier est mon ennemi via le groupe dans lequel je me suis socialisé sur Internet, qui crée une distance avec celui qui est mon voisin de palier, en sens inverse, qui crée des haines incommensurables. Voilà. Moi, j'avais fait étudier plusieurs cas à ce sujet. J'avais publié un livre il y a quelque temps qui s'appelait « La guerre des civilisations n'aurait pas lieu ». Le sous-titre, c'était « Coexistence et violence au XXIe siècle ». Et les journalistes, qui souvent ne lisent pas, donc je suis sympathique lorsque je dis ça.
Sympa pour les journalistes.
Voilà. Souvent, là j'en ai fait l'expérience puisque j'ai eu une très longue interview, et l'interview il commence, où ils me disent la guerre des civilisations n'aura pas lieu. Raphaël Yogier, vous ne seriez pas pessimiste? Vous n'êtes pas un peu trop pessimiste? Ah plutôt non, vous n'êtes pas un peu trop optimiste, excusez-moi. Vous n'êtes pas un peu trop optimiste? Je leur dis, mais vous n'avez pas lu le livre? Je dis dans le livre qu'il n'y a pas de guerre des civilisations parce que ça serait trop facile. C'est-à-dire, c'est bien pire. C'est une guerre intestine sans même les logiques de frontières qui permettent d'avoir des rapports, même si ce sont des rapports de force, clairs. Là, ce sont des logiques de guerre interne qui sont indissociables de cette nouvelle strate de construction identitaire. Autrement dit, je dis, c'est beaucoup plus grave que ce que vous appelez une guerre de civilisation, qui est qu'une mise en scène qui vient du siècle dernier. Oui. En fait, aujourd'hui, maintenant, c'est là où je veux en venir. Aujourd'hui, on n'arrête pas de parler de géopolitique. Moi, je crois que la plupart des grands conflits actuels ne peuvent plus se résoudre de façon géopolitique, c'est-à-dire dans des logiques territoriales. Et le problème, c'est que l'État, c'est-à-dire le garant du politique, le garant essentiel du politique aujourd'hui, est fondé entièrement sur la logique géographique. C'est pourquoi on a la police pour l'intérieur, si on parle de sécurité, et l'armée pour l'extérieur. Mais il n'y a plus d'extérieur et d'intérieur à ce niveau-là. Il y a une pervasivité de la construction identitaire. Autrement dit, c'est plus possible de réfléchir en termes essentiellement géopolitiques. Ça ne veut pas dire que ça n'existe plus. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'il n'y a pas des États, qu'il n'y a pas une inertie institutionnelle. Mais qu'une grande partie, peut-être 2/3 des conflits, ne peuvent plus par nature être résolus de cette façon-là. Donc moi, je plaide pour ce que j'ai essayé de mettre en place quand j'étais chercheur invité à Columbia University, et j'espère arriver à le mettre en place ici, pour la naissance d'une nouvelle discipline que j'appelle Global Identity Studies. C'est une discipline qui, à mon sens, devrait remplacer la géopolitique, remplacer la science politique telle qu'elle est conçue aujourd'hui, la sociologie, l'anthropologie, et même une partie des études sur Internet. Pourquoi ? Parce qu'on a des gens, aujourd'hui en sciences humaines, qui étudient les identités territorialisées. Il y a des très très bons chercheurs qui connaissent exactement comment fonctionnent des identités sur des territoires spécifiques. On a des très bons chercheurs qui travaillent sur les diasporas, les flux, comment tout ça fonctionne. On a même des très bons chercheurs, comme Olivier Servet ou d'autres, qui travaillent sur la 3e strate, ce que j'appelle les identités déterritorialisées, qui sont sur des espaces d'interaction symbolique déterritorialisés, des très bons chercheurs qui étudient comment ça se passe dans les espaces Internet, comment les conflits entrent en jeu, etc. Par contre, on n'a ni la méthodologie, ni les recherches qui travaillent sur l'interaction entre les 3 niveaux. Et en fait, il faut comprendre que le dernier niveau, le niveau des interactions symboliques sans territoire, dans ces espaces, n'annule pas le niveau précédent, c'est-à-dire le sens diasporique de l'individu, qui n'annule pas le premier niveau, le fait que je sois français, que je sois américain, ou que je sois marocain, ou que je sois je ne sais pas quoi, ou que j'habite dans cette région ailleurs. Mais par contre, ça fait varier la relation entre les 3, ferait varier la nature même de l'identité territoriale, la nature même du 2e niveau et la nature même du 3e niveau. C'est cette complexité-là qui n'est pas envisagée, qui n'est pas appréhendée, alors que c'est notre réalité actuelle. Donc moi, je plaide pour qu'on travaille sur ça en créant cette nouvelle discipline, les Global Identity Studies. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Merci infiniment d'avoir partagé cela avec nous. Très intéressant, effectivement. Je voudrais m'assurer maintenant qu'on puisse prendre quelques questions dans la salle. Please, you can either ask your question in English or in French. We want you to be comfortable. We have one first question here on the right side. Une question là sur la droite.
Merci. 2 remarques. Je commence par la dernière, où je suis très sensible à cet effet des strates, Raphaël. C'est important. Finalement, un millefeuille n'est pas bon par sa seule peut-être feuille, mais par l'addition de l'ensemble de ces feuilles. Et c'est un peu ça ce qu'il faut faire. Tu as absolument, on peut appeler ça le syndrome du pâtissier. Mais c'est exactement ça. On arrivera à comprendre par la globalité, comme tu as dit, à la fois dans le micro et dans le global. Hein, tu as employé les 2 termes. C'est pas choquant, c'est exactement ça. Enfin, c'est comme ça que je pense en scientifique. C'est une excellente notion. Je voudrais... May I speak French for you? Wikipédia. C'est pas la meilleure des choses. Et je vous donne un exemple. Quand l'énergie des éoliennes est sortie, il y avait sur Wikipédia, fait par des scientifiques, qui montrait que les surgénérateurs puissants des éoliennes nécessitaient 600 tonnes de néodyme. Le néodyme en lui-même n'est pas radioactif, mais il est extrait d'une roche très radioactive, et dans les pays où on l'extrait, cette roche fait des ravages au point de vue radioactivité, où la radioactivité de l'air et 30 fois celle de Tchernobyl. Donc des dégâts considérables. Les écologistes européens plaident pour l'utilisation des grandes éoliennes. Ils sont écologistes, donc pour eux l'écologie s'arrête à leurs frontières. Très peu de temps après, le développement de la politique des éoliennes s'est généralisé en Europe et tout ce passage sur Wikipédia a été supprimé. Il y a donc dans Wikipédia un outil extraordinaire encyclopédique et à la fois un outil politique terrible. Comment va-t-on, dans les prochaines années, réussir à séparer cette influence politique considérable sur la connaissance et arrêter d'orienter la connaissance? Car Internet est un outil terrible. Quand j'étais au Brésil, il y avait des nouvelles. Vous savez, des nouvelles, c'est des feuilletons. Et dans ce feuilleton qui durait, où tous les Brésiliens regardent ces nouvelles avec amour, un moment, l'héroïne voit son mari qui la trompe et elle se suicide. Eh bien, le héros du feuilleton, en sortant des studios, a été abattu à coups de balle de revolver parce qu'il avait trompé sa femme. On passe là vraiment, vous voyez, dans une autre réalité. Donc voilà, pour illustrer ces passages, j'aimerais recueillir ce que vous en pensez et comment séparer cette connaissance, comment séparer le réel de l'irréel, le réel du politique.
I think we are coming to the heart of the matter. Let me first comment briefly on Raphael. Social scientists typically look at interactions between different groups and looking particularly at antagonisms, conflicts. So my background as a scientist, I'm rather looking at things from an as universal as possible way. So I'm rather looking not at what distinguishes people, their identities, but at what integrates them, what binds them, what makes them human. And I see that there are many more things that people have in common than things that they disagree with. But it's of course the disagreements that are most discussed by definition. You don't discuss something that everybody agrees about. So now Wikipedia is a very interesting experiment in the sense that a global encyclopedia is an attempt to agree about something. And that is intrinsically very difficult, but I think that in spite of the fact that so many people will find so many examples of things in Wikipedia that are not the way they want it to be, overall, Wikipedia is an extremely balanced thing. There will always be conflicts, there will always be people who say, yes, but I wrote that part in a Wikipedia section and some editor has removed it. And then you can question that, yes. But, and now I come back to what I was trying to say, this principle of stigmergy, which is also the principle of the way that collective intelligence happens in ants or in termites. How do ants find the way to the food? Different ants explore in different directions. If one ant finds food, it comes back to the nest, it leaves a pheromone trace. Other ants tend to follow the trace. If they also find food, the trace gets reinforced. If other ants don't find food, they will not reinforce the trace. If the food is finished, the trace will weaken. So what happens is that collectively, the ants tend to find the shortest route to the biggest food sources. Collectively, they come to the conclusion these are the paths to take. So now Wikipedia is something similar. You have thousands of people who all add something or remove something. They say that thing should definitely be there, that thing definitely should not be there. So sometimes things are taken away that you think that should have been there. Sometimes things are added there that you think should not have been. But because it's collective, in general there is a kind of a majority opinion that will decide that yes, this is accepted knowledge that should be in the page, this is not accepted knowledge, it should not be in the page, and we can all disagree about it. And of course it's not because the majority thinks that this is what should be there and this is what should not be there, that the majority is right, but it is a process to which you can gradually build up and come to some kind of a consensus. And some of the interesting questions in Wikipedia are the typically controversies. Take the presidency of Trump, or take the Armenian genocide. Of course, if you're an Armenian, you will want to have completely different things written there than if you're a Turk. So, in some cases, there are what I call edit wars, where one person changes and another one immediately puts it back and another one again changes it. At some cases, Wikipedia editors take some drastic measures of freezing a page at a certain moment, not allowing people to edit it. It happens, and those things, when they happen, typically they come in the news and people say, yes, but you see, Wikipedia is not objective because this and this and this, but they forget that the great majority of pages in Wikipedia give very good, pretty objective information that kind of generally discusses the general opinion, the collective knowledge of humanity. So that is a challenge. It is difficult to decide what is a collective knowledge. And if you say there was an Armenian genocide and the Turkish guy says, no, there was not an Armenian genocide, yeah, it's sometimes difficult to say what there was, but you can, what Wikipedia's policy in this case is try to provide a balanced view, criticisms and counter-arguments. So the typical Wikipedia article says, these are some of the propositions put forward, and these are some of the criticisms made about these positions, each time with references. And that is a relatively simple but effective way to stop the discussion, say, there is one opinion here, it says this and this and this with these arguments, there's another opinion there, it says this and this and this with these arguments, and you can at least agree to disagree. And I think it is the power of Wikipedia that in most cases it succeeds very well in that.
Thank you very much. We'll take your reaction, and then I want to make sure that we take one last question from the audience. Yes, please, Raphaël. Please go ahead.
J'ai juste pour donner une anecdote, puisque finalement on est entre nous là, on est quasiment intime. Donc,
Intime streamé sur YouTube, je me dois de vous le préciser,
cela dit. C'est pas grave, on est intime quand même, c'est comme dans les émissions du 20h, on dit entre nous,
on est entre nous,
2 millions de téléspectateurs. Oui, mais là on en est loin, je pense. Mais il y a une dizaine d'années, j'ai rencontré à New York le fondateur de Wikipédia. Et je me suis plaint auprès de lui de ma page Wikipédia. Parce que j'ai 3 pages Wikipédia que j'ai jamais touchées, je ne sais pas pourquoi, il y en a une en français, il y en a une en anglais, il y en a une en arabe. Alors celle en arabe, je ne sais pas ce qu'il y a dedans, elle est assez courte, j'espère. Alors je me dis, mais il y a des choses sur Wikipédia qui sont juste fausses. C'est-à-dire, mais sur ma page, mais complètement fausses. Et donc, il y a des amis qui connaissent, qui savent comment aller sur Wikipédia. Moi, je connais absolument rien. Donc, ils ont essayé juste de mettre l'information. Alors, soi-disant, il faut mettre d'où ça vient, pourquoi, etc. Donc, ils l'ont mis. Et comme disait Francis, 1 heure après, chlouc, immédiatement, c'est remis. Il y a autre chose, il y a la chose qui est fausse, soi-disant prouvée. Mais c'est pas prouvé, c'est-à-dire qu'ils ont vu dans un magazine que quelqu'un disait que j'étais ceci, mais justement pour m'insulter. Et donc, ils disent, la source, c'est quelqu'un qui déjà essaye de m'insulter, qui lui-même prend pour source une autre source, qui sont entièrement fausses. Alors je m'en suis plaint. Au départ, je m'en étais plaint auprès d'un responsable de Wikipédia, c'était pas le fondateur, et il m'avait répondu. Moi, je croyais que c'était les querelles sur l'islamophobie, etc. Parce qu'effectivement, il y avait un débat avec Caroline Fourest, qui est une journaliste qui se prend pour autre chose qu'une journaliste en France. Et on m'avait dit, c'est incroyable, hein, ils m'ont dit, on a fait une recherche, ça vient des Chinois. Je dis, mais comment ça se fait, ça vient des Chinois? Ils m'ont dit, c'est simple, on a vu d'où ça venait. Et en fait, c'est pour vous discréditer parce que vous avez écrit un livre qui s'appelle « À la rencontre du Dalai Lama » chez Flammarion. Et donc, même si, là où on vous discrédite, là où vous êtes fragile, Mais en fait, ça ne vient pas des groupes que vous croyez qui sont des groupes en France, etc. Non, non, c'est... Ça, c'est une première chose. Et la deuxième chose, et c'est vraiment l'anecdote, qui est assez drôle, c'est que là, le fondateur de Wikipédia, quand je lui ai fait part de tout ça a posteriori, je lui ai dit, mais comment on peut faire, quoi, pour... Alors il m'a dit, c'est simple, tant que vous n'êtes pas mort, le problème ne sera jamais réglé. Mais quand vous êtes mort, ne vous inquiétez plus, tout le monde s'en fout. Après, ça devient de plus en plus réglo, parfait, ça fonctionne. Mais tant que vous êtes vivant, c'est impossible d'arriver à régler ce problème.
Bon, en tout cas, on ira vérifier votre page Wikipédia en arabe et on vous dira ce qu'il en est. Je veux m'assurer qu'il y a... Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions dans la salle? Any other questions? Yes, please. Marwan? Non. Team Tech, if we can please activate. Si on peut activer le micro.
Là, ça devrait marcher, ok.
Ouais.
Donc, merci de vos présentations respectives. J'ai une question pour Raphaël et une question pour Francis. Je vais commencer par la première question par rapport à l'idée de Global Identity Studies. Je trouve ça très, très, très intéressant et même l'idée des strates, je trouve que ça illustre très bien l'interpénétration et l'interaction entre justement ces strates-là. Mais ma question, juste comme ça, vos hypothèses de façon intuitive, on parle là de la réalité virtuelle, peut-être c'est un effet marketing, j'en sais rien, mais quand on a par exemple le produit d'Apple qui rend en fait l'ici et l'ailleurs en un seul et unique endroit où justement l'interaction symbolique qui supposait la présence des corps, c'est le travail de l'école de Chicago, et vous avez bien parlé de l'absence de la pesanteur du corps et comme quoi ça peut avoir des conséquences encore insoupçonnées. Mais que se passerait-il justement quand je serais ici et là-bas en même temps dans une interaction? Je voudrais juste comme ça, si vous avez déjà des hypothèses par rapport à ça. Et puis, the question is for Francis. If you just can talk to us, since we are among friends, about this notion of emergence and noosphere and your own understanding of Teilhard de Chardin's notion, even if there is any link with Omega Point or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marwan. Let's take this as a final question, then we'll wrap up. Yes, let's please, Francis, and then we'll wrap up with
yeah, well, for the noosphere, I'm not going to say much because tomorrow I'm giving a talk about that. I wouldn't go into the point omega. I personally don't like that metaphor of the point omega, but I call it a meta-system transition, a transition to a higher level of intelligence. And I will explain that tomorrow. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Raphaël, as the final word, probably.
Je dirais qu'en fait, la notion même de corps, en matière de construction d'identité, quand on dit qu'on est face à des corps, on est face à quoi? Même là, lorsque je suis face à vous, je suis face à l'image de votre corps. C'est-à-dire, je suis face aux photons de lumière qui se reflètent sur vous, qui viennent, et puis quand je vous parle, hop, vous interagissez. Et donc, l'interaction symbolique, c'est ce qui compte. Pour moi. Maintenant, lorsqu'il va y avoir une intensification, c'est-à-dire que les pixels seront tellement sophistiqués qu'on ne peut plus faire la différence entre l'ici et là-bas, l'ailleurs, etc., ça va juste concurrencer de façon plus intense encore le rapport que nous entretenons au territoire physique existant. Pour moi, c'est tout ce que ça va faire. Et donc, qu'est-ce que ça va faire? Ça va accroître des formes de solidarité, comme déjà avec les mangas, ça va les accroître à un certain niveau, où les gens se sentiront encore plus proches, encore plus, on est potes, on reste ensemble pour la soirée, je reste avec ton avatar, on est peinard, voilà. Et en même temps, ça va faire ce que je décrivais aussi, c'est-à-dire des formes de haine, d'opposition et de violence vis-à-vis de ceux qui sont juste à côté physiquement, en raison de ces solidarités qui sont ceux qui sont lointains. Vous voyez, ça fait les deux en même temps. Moi, je n'ai pas le temps de l'expliquer, mais je l'ai expliqué dans le détail dans La guerre des civilisations n'aura pas lieu. Le djihadisme 2.0, la variable manquante dans ce qu'a fait le gouvernement français depuis 2015, et j'avais été consulté par Laurent Fabius, par François Hollande, par toute une série de gens, et j'ai commencé par être auditionné par l'Assemblée nationale une semaine après les attentats, j'étais le premier auditionné, Ils étaient tous d'accord, ils trouvaient ça logique. Ils n'ont rien fait de ce que j'avais préconisé. Et pourtant, c'est ce qui a fonctionné. Qu'est-ce que je préconisais? Quelque chose d'assez simple. Je disais, nous avons remarqué dans nos enquêtes, nous avons remarqué de façon très claire, nous avons remarqué qu'un certain nombre de groupes qui semblent être archi-visibles du point de vue de ce que vous représentez comme un islam radical, dangereux, etc., qui peuvent poser des problèmes à la société française, X, Y, de rejet, de la modernité, de tout ce qu'on veut, mais ces groupes, quand on analyse ce qui se passe dans les réseaux sociaux, comment ils fonctionnent et comment ils construisent leur identité globalisée, ne sont pas un risque djihadiste. C'est les groupes salafistes, néo-salafistes. Il n'y a pas eu un seul salafiste qui a commis un attentat en France. On dit aujourd'hui pas un seul. C'est même pas on fait semblant, on dit un peu, etc. Ça ne veut pas dire que ce sont des gens plus sympathiques. Les journalistes sont toujours... qu'on est pour ou qu'on est contre. La question n'est ni d'être pour, ni d'être contre. C'est que lorsqu'on analysait, nous, ce qui se passait sur Internet, on voyait que ces gens, ils étaient tellement dans littéralistes que comme il n'y avait pas de Kalachnikov à l'époque du prophète, ils considéraient que c'était haram. Et pareil, ils considéraient que même à la limite, aller assassiner quelqu'un, c'est le toucher, donc c'était impur. Donc à la limite, c'était au nom même de leur littéralisme. Alors c'est incompréhensible quand on est dans un racisme culturel comme il s'est développé en France ces dernières années. Mais il s'est développé au point de nous mettre en danger, de mettre en danger directement notre sécurité. Chaque fois que je disais ça, on disait, il veut protéger les salafistes, donc c'est un allié du terrorisme. N'importe quoi. C'était n'importe quoi. C'était au contraire pour des raisons de sécurité. Mais à côté de ça, on a vu des groupes qui se sont constitués, qui ne se réunissaient que via Internet, mais qui existaient, que j'ai appelés les nouveaux ninjas de l'islam, pour dire qu'ils n'étaient pas du tout dans le « on se met à faire de l'arabe classique » comme font les salafistes, on se met à faire les 5 prières, on se met à faire toute une série, non, pas du tout. Ils se réunissaient ils ne savent pas parler arabe à part Wallah Akbar, en sachant à peine ce que ça veut dire. Ils s'habillaient avec ce que j'appelais le costume néo-afghan des cités, avec côté bottes, etc., en étant vraiment dans une forme de violence. On avait repéré certains de ces groupes un groupe qui avait brûlé le code pénal français en hurlant. On leur a dit, là, il y a un vrai danger. Là, il y a danger de violence. On voit bien que la violence est en train de... Mais on les trouve dans les clubs de kickboxing, parfois en boîte de nuit ou ailleurs, mais on ne les trouve pas dans ce... L'expérience de l'islam devient une expérience de la violence au nom même de l'idée que l'islam est projeté sur la scène publique comme étant l'ennemi. Donc comme eux, ils veulent être l'ennemi, ça devient l'opportunité d'être des ninjas. Et donc on a montré comment ces groupes fonctionnaient. Et on leur a dit, en fait, dans la complexité des différentes strates, enfin, on leur a dit, je leur ai dit, en leur montrant comment ça fonctionnait, effectivement, il y a un lien avec les salafistes, mais pas celui que vous croyez. Un lien que vous pouvez utiliser pour faire des vraies politiques de sécurité. C'est que les salafistes détestent ces gens. Et ils sont les seuls à savoir qui ils sont. Pourquoi ? Parce que ces gens, ils sont disséminés dans l'ensemble de la population française, ils sont dans les clubs de kickboxing ici, ils sont là, etc. Ils se mettent à l'islam, là, 3 mois ou 4 mois avant leur attentat, voire 1 an, voire 2 ans, maximum. Ils sont disséminés dans la nature, ils ne parlent pas l'arabe classique, ils ne vont pas à la mosquée, ils ne font pas la prière, rien, contrairement à ce qu'on croit, ils sont dans des signifiants purement guerriers. Sauf que, comme ça fait partie de leur entraînement psychique pour l'attentat, très peu de temps avant de commettre l'attentat, la majorité d'entre eux veulent fréquenter comme une préparation les mosquées qu'ils estiment être les plus radicales, donc les mosquées salafites. Et à ce moment-là, c'est le seul moment où ils peuvent être repérés et on the verge de la violence, de l'attentat. Et qui peut les repérer ? Les seuls qui les détestent, c'est-à-dire les salafistes. Mais qu'est-ce qu'a fait le gouvernement français ? C'est pour vous dire, quand je parlais de problèmes de sécurité liés au territoire complètement fous, c'est que malgré tout ce que j'ai dit, malgré la compréhension qu'a montré Laurent Fabius et d'autres à ce sujet, qu'est-ce qu'a fait le gouvernement français ? Ils ont mis en résidence surveillée tous les leaders du salafisme français, alors que ces leaders en question, je l'ai montré, quand on regardait Dar al-Islam, le magazine en ligne de Daesh, c'était eux qui étaient visés comme cible prioritaire à éliminer par Daesh Parce que justement, il s'adressait au même public et il est détourné de l'attentat. Ça veut dire qu'on a éliminé, on a les gens, les seuls qui pouvaient nous indiquer où étaient, tout en produisant une politique fondamentalement arbitraire qui nous plaçait au niveau mondial comme cible de gens fondamentalement islamophobes. Donc c'est pour ça que moi je disais à l'époque, je ne suis pas contre Manuel Valls parce qu'il fait une politique de sécurité, je ne suis pas un gauchiste comme ça, pas du tout. C'est que c'est juste une politique d'insécurité, mise en place d'un système d'insécurité, par une mécompréhension totale du fonctionnement des différentes strates identitaires et en particulier de la dernière. J'étais scandalisé par ça, j'étais tellement scandalisé par ça, c'est pour ça qu'en 2015, je suis parti aux États-Unis à Columbia.
Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, on a une analyse de cas très précise et très concrète et merci infiniment Francis et Raphaël pour vos partages. On voit toute la complexité du sujet, le débat est lancé. Je souhaite qu'on les remercie tous les deux bien fort et qu'on puisse les applaudir et je vous invite à regagner l'audience. Thank you so much for both of you for your input. Thank you again. Alors, ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude day 3 of Science Week 2024, I want us to reflect on the diverse array of topics that we've explored together today, from delving into social transitions to the use of game theory to study the evolution of behavior over time. We delved into soil conservation and discussed the nuances of digital transformation. Tomorrow, our day kicks off at 9:30 a.m. We kindly ask you, you watching us on YouTube to join and you in the room to come a little bit earlier as we deeply respect and appreciate your time. It is your most valuable asset, so we want to make sure that we start on time, and we're committed to honoring it by starting on time. So thank you for your cooperation for that. Tomorrow we'll be delving into a vision of the universe in transition, humanity in transition, amongst many other exciting topics. And of course we will hear from our own and only Moroccan chef, Fatima Hel, who will join us and walk us through Moroccan gastronomy of the future. A quick reminder for you all, our day doesn't end here. We have a special treat planned for this evening. Join us at 7 a.m. at the other auditorium, not here, for an exceptional recital by Geoffroy Couteau, who is one of the world's leading performers of Brahms. Mr. Couteau, who was awarded the first prize in the international Johannes Brahms competition in 2005, will enchant us with his musical talent. So you don't want to miss it. So I'll see you there in the other auditorium across the campus. Thank you all so much for your presence. Thank you.